You've been lied to about life. They told you that peace comes from control, from having the perfect plan, from making sure nothing ever goes wrong. But if that were true, why do people who try to control everything still feel anxious? Why do you still feel restless, waking up at night with thoughts spinning, afraid of the future, stuck in the loop of what if? The truth is, the universe was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be trusted. And Buddhism holds the map. For centuries, the wisest teachers Buddha, Nagarjuna, Zen masters have whispered the same truth, that letting go is not weakness, it's power, that surrender is not giving up, it's waking up, that when you stop fighting life, life starts carrying you. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, something inside you will shift. The tightness in your chest will begin to loosen. The noise in your mind will grow softer, like waves calming after a storm. And a deep knowing will rise. The universe is not against you, it is holding you. When you wake up tomorrow, you'll feel it. Lighter, clearer, more alive. Not because the world changed, but because you finally trusted it. This is not just another sleep story. This is a journey back to your true nature, calm, open, free. Are you ready to let go and fall into the arms of the universe? Let's begin. You've just felt the invitation to let go, to stop fighting against life, and begin trusting the universe. Before we step deeper, let me tell you something that might stir something inside of you. The very thing you've been clinging to for safety, the idea of control, is the very thing that has been keeping you in chains. The thought that if you could only manage every detail, predict every outcome, or hold on tightly enough, you would finally feel safe. It's a lie. And Buddhism reveals why this illusion not only exhausts us, but also blinds us from the freedom already waiting beneath the surface. Tonight, we're going to sink into the lesson of emptiness, a truth that transforms fear into strength and control into harmony. In Buddhism, there is a teaching called shunyata, often translated as emptiness. To many people, the word sounds frightening. Emptiness feels like loss, like nothingness, like a void that swallows meaning. But that isn't what it means here. Emptiness in Buddhism is not about absence, it's about freedom. It is the recognition that everything you cling to as solid and permanent is actually fluid, shifting, interconnected. The job, the relationship, the identity, even the thoughts that race through your head, all of them lack fixed, independent existence. They are not under your ultimate control. And here lies the secret. Once you see this, instead of panic, you discover peace. Think about it. When you believe life is something you can control, every moment becomes a battlefield. You wake up already tense, worrying about whether things will go the way you planned. The traffic, the weather, your health, the behavior of others, so much lies outside your hands. Yet you carry the burden as if you could bend reality to your will. No wonder you feel drained. But when you see the emptiness of control, you stop demanding the universe to fit your design. You begin to flow with it instead of against it. This doesn't mean you become passive or careless. Quite the opposite. By releasing the illusion of control, your actions become clearer, wiser, more effective. Picture a sailor on the sea. The waves and wind are never under the sailor's command. No amount of shouting or grasping can stop a storm. But by accepting that truth, by studying the currents, raising the sails, and learning to adjust, the sailor moves with power and grace. This is the strength that comes from surrender. You are no longer paralyzed by fear of the uncontrollable. You become skillful in response to it. Buddhism teaches that clinging to control is a form of ignorance, because it assumes the self is separate from the rest of existence. When you believe I must control the world, you create a split that doesn't actually exist. Shunyata shows that both I and the world are empty of fixed identity. They arise together, shaped by countless conditions. You breathe because the trees produce oxygen. You live because countless ancestors survived before you. Even your thoughts are influenced by languages you didn't invent and cultures you didn't create. Control becomes impossible once you see how vast the web of causes truly island. And yet, here is the gift. When control dissolves, interconnection appears. Instead of a hostile universe to be managed, you meet a living field of cooperation. Suddenly, letting go is not defeat but alignment. You can trust that the same intelligence that allows seeds to sprout and rivers to carve valleys is also moving through your life. You do not have to force the river to flow. You only need to stop building dams in your mind. This insight transforms the way you hold challenges. Think about moments of loss, the end of a relationship, the loss of a job, the collapse of plans you cherished. Normally, the instinct is to fight, to grip tighter, to rage at life for not going your way. But in emptiness, you see that nothing was ever yours to own. The relationship, the job, the plan they were, conditions that arose, flourished for a time, and passed when causes changed. When you stop calling that a failure, you see it for what it is, the dance of conditions. One door closes, and another quietly opens. When you stop clinging, you start seeing. Modern psychology touches the same truth. Studies on resilience show that people who accept uncertainty and loosen their grip on control experience less anxiety and greater well-being. Their minds adapt more quickly because they are not wasting energy resisting what cannot be changed. They resemble the bamboo in the wind, flexible, rooted, unbroken. Buddhism revealed this centuries ago. Clinging breeds suffering, but letting go allows life to carry you. You may wonder, but if I surrender control, won't I lose my power? That fear is natural, yet it arises from misunderstanding. Surrender doesn't strip you of power, it reveals where true power comes from. Consider how much energy you burn in endless worry, rehearsing scenarios in your head that never happen. That energy is wasted. But when you surrender the fight to control outcomes, your energy is freed to act where it truly matters in the present moment, with the resources available, in harmony with what island. The result is not weakness, but effectiveness. There's also a deeper shift here. Surrendering control reshapes how you relate to yourself. Many of us live with harsh inner voices, criticizing every mistake, demanding perfection. These voices arise because we believe we must control not just life, but ourselves completely. When you fail to meet those impossible standards, guilt and shame flood in. But when you understand emptiness, you see that even the self is not a fixed object to control. Your thoughts, moods, and behaviors are conditions arising and passing. Instead of self-hatred, compassion arises. You treat yourself not as a broken machine to fix, but as a living process to care for. Buddhist teachers often point to the breath as a lesson in this. You cannot force the breath to always be deep or perfect. The body breathes on its own, whether you think about it or not. But you can meet the breath with awareness. You can allow it. You can ride its rhythm. In the same way, you don't command the universe, but you can live in tune with it. Breathing becomes a metaphor for surrender, each inhale taken as a gift, each exhale as a letting go. Another layer of this lesson is trust. Control is rooted in distrust, the belief that if you let go, everything will collapse. But emptiness reveals that things are already supported by countless causes. The sun rises without your effort. The earth spins without your command. Your heart beats without your permission. Trust grows when you notice how much is already being carried for you. The practice becomes less about making things happen and more about allowing life to unfold. This shift from control to trust also changes relationships. Think of how often conflict arises because one person tries to control another, wanting them to act, think, or feel a certain way. Control breeds resentment. But when you release the need to control others, you create space for genuine connection. You can listen without an agenda, love without chains, and respect the unfolding of another person's path. Relationships breathe when control ends. On a larger scale, this teaching frees you from the fear of uncertainty. Life will always be unpredictable, full of sudden turns. Trying to hold certainty is like trying to grip water. It slips through no matter how tight you clutch. Emptiness shows that uncertainty is not a flaw, but the natural state of existence. Once you stop fearing it, uncertainty becomes a field of possibility. Instead of asking, "What if it goes wrong?" you begin to ask, "What if something new emerges?" Surrender transforms fear into curiosity. Spiritual traditions across the world echo this truth, but Buddhism places it at the heart. By realizing shunyata, you stop clinging to false ground. And strangely, when the ground disappears, you don't fall, you float. Freedom arises not from standing on solid certainty, but from moving lightly on shifting ground. In this way, surrender does not mean defeat, but liberation. The lesson becomes even more profound when applied to suffering. Pain is part of life. This is undeniable. But much of our suffering comes from trying to control pain, to push it away or demand it vanish. Yet emptiness teaches that pain, like all things, is impermanent. When you stop fighting it and allow it to rise and fall, suffering lessens. Your mind no longer adds the weight of resistance to the raw sensation. You discover that acceptance can feel lighter than struggle. This is not resignation, it is wisdom. It is saying yes to life as it is, not as you wish it to be. From this yes, new possibilities emerge, creativity flows, compassion deepens, presence sharpens. You are no longer consumed by the battle to control, and so you can finally participate fully in living. Great masters have always pointed to this. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's there are few." Control tries to force one outcome, emptiness opens to many. By letting go, you create space for miracles small and large that control would have crushed. This lesson is not only philosophical but practical. You can begin to practice it now in small ways. When plans shift unexpectedly, notice the instinct to resist. Instead of tightening, soften. Ask, what else is possible here? When anxiety rises, see if it comes from trying to control what is beyond you. If so, release it back to the universe. When anger burns, check if it's fueled by unmet expectations of control. If so, breathe and let those expectations dissolve. Over time, this practice rewires your mind. The habit of grasping weakens, and the habit of flowing strengthens. As this deepens, you begin to feel a paradoxical kind of power. The less you try to control, the more aligned you feel. Life moves more smoothly, not because circumstances are perfect, but because you stopped fighting them. The current carries you, instead of exhausting you. This is why surrender strengthens power, because it frees you from wasting energy where it cannot be spent, and channels it where it truly matters into presence, compassion, wisdom, and action. So tonight, as you listen and as you rest, let this truth settle inside you. The emptiness of control is not a threat, but a doorway. It is the end of exhaustion and the beginning of harmony. Each moment you release the grip, you feel lighter. Each time you surrender, you discover strength you didn't know was there. You are not falling into nothing, you are falling into everything. And the universe, vast and timeless, is already holding you. When you begin to see the emptiness of control, a new question quietly rises. If nothing is fixed, if every moment is fluid and dependent on conditions, then how does anything hold together? What keeps life from becoming meaningless chaos? This is where another teaching enters, like a hidden thread running through the fabric of existence, karma. But karma is not what most people think. It is not a cosmic jailer waiting to punish, nor a rigid chain dragging you from one life to the next. Karma is a web, subtle and alive, weaving every thought, word, and action into a tapestry of interconnection. When you understand this, trust in the universe deepens, because you realize you are never a powerless victim of fate. You are a participant in creation itself. Karma, in its true sense, simply means action. Every movement of body, speech, or mind sets conditions into motion. These conditions ripple outward, touching countless lives, and eventually circle back in forms we often cannot predict. The teaching is not about judgment, but about cause and effect, about the way reality unfolds. If you throw a seed into the soil, it does not become a stone, it becomes a plant in its time. If you speak with kindness, the energy of kindness reverberates, shaping both the listener and yourself. If you act with cruelty, the same is true. Karma is not a punishment from outside, but the natural unfolding of interdependent causes. This is where the metaphor of the web reveals its power. Think of a spider's web glistening in the morning dew. Each strand connects to others, and when one part trembles, the vibration travels across the whole. Karma functions like this. Your choices never exist in isolation. The words you say to a friend echo in their heart, perhaps affecting how they treat the next person they meet. A single gesture of generosity may ripple into countless unseen benefits. In the same way, careless words can wound more deeply than you know, sending ripples far beyond your sight. The reason this understanding builds trust is because it shows life is not random. Even when things appear chaotic, there is always a web of causes weaving what unfolds. You may not see every thread, but the patterns are there. Trust is not blind faith. It is the recognition that your actions matter. That meaning is born from interconnection. In this way, karma reveals the universe not as a cold machine, but as a living system in which your participation is essential. There is also freedom hidden here. If karma were a chain, binding you to past mistakes with no release, life would feel hopeless. But the Buddha emphasized that karma is dynamic, always moving. What you did in the past conditions the present, yes, but the present moment holds infinite new possibilities. Every mindful choice becomes a new cause, planting seeds for different futures. No matter how tangled the web has been, each moment is a chance to weave differently. This is why trust in the universe grows stronger. You realize that while you cannot rewrite what has been done, you can always shift how you act now, and that choice is powerful. In daily life, this means paying attention not just to big decisions but to small ones. The way you respond when someone irritates you, the tone you use when you speak, the thoughts you entertain when you are alone, these are all strands in the web. People often underestimate small actions, thinking they do not matter. But the web makes clear that nothing is insignificant. The world you experience tomorrow is woven partly from the choices you make today. When you see this, even the most ordinary moment becomes sacred ground for shaping your future. This teaching also helps transform how we view suffering. Often, when pain arises, the question becomes, why me? What did I do to deserve this? But karma is not about blame. It is about understanding that what unfolds now arises from countless interwoven causes, some personal, some collective, some stretching back far beyond what you can trace. To sit in endless guilt or resentment misses the point. The real question is not, why did this happen? But, how do I respond now? What seed am I planting in this moment? In this way, suffering becomes a turning point, an opportunity to weave a new pattern. Trust also grows when you realize that karma is not limited to your personal story. Entire communities, societies, Even civilizations are part of the karmic web. The greed of a few may ripple into poverty for many. The compassion of one leader may inspire countless acts of goodness. The universe is not indifferent. It is alive with this law of cause and effect, a law that binds us all together. When you understand this, you feel less alone. You see that your choices, however small, participate in shaping the whole. One of the most liberating aspects of this teaching is that it dissolves the obsession with control without breeding helplessness. In the last lesson, we saw how control is an illusion. Now, karma shows that your participation still matters deeply. You cannot control the web, but you can contribute to it. You do not need to dominate life. You need only to add strands of clarity, compassion, and wisdom. Over time, those strands strengthen the whole fabric. You may not see the results immediately, but the web never forgets. Every cause bears fruit in its time. This naturally leads to patience. Modern life encourages instant results, but karma reminds us that seeds take time to ripen. A harsh word may have an immediate sting, but the effect of a gentle presence may unfold quietly for years before blooming fully. To trust the universe means accepting this timing, allowing causes to ripen when they are ready. Your role is not to force the fruit, but to keep planting wisely. With this perspective, frustration gives way to faith in the slow, steady rhythm of the web. It also shifts how you view morality. Rules and commandments often feel external, imposed by authority. But karma shows that ethical behavior is not about obedience. It is about alignment with the way reality works. When you act with honesty, kindness, and integrity, you are not following orders, you are planting seeds that naturally bring peace and clarity. When you act with greed or hatred, you are planting seeds that naturally bring turmoil. Morality is simply wisdom applied to the web. It is not about judgment, but about skillful participation. One of the most beautiful expressions of this is generosity. When you give without expectation, you strengthen the strands of trust and goodwill. This does not only benefit the receiver, it shapes your own mind, softening attachment and opening the heart. The act itself becomes a seed that transforms both giver and receiver. This is karma at its most luminous, the recognition that each act of goodness is not lost, but woven into the web, where it can uplift countless lives. Modern science has started to reflect this truth in subtle ways. Research into social behavior shows that kindness spreads through networks, influencing people who may never meet the original giver. One smile can shift a stranger's mood, who then treats someone else more kindly, setting off a chain of positive effects. Karma anticipated this long before studies confirmed it. The universe is always recording the vibrations of our actions, always transmitting them through the web of life. Understanding karma as a web also deepens compassion. When someone harms you, the instinct is to respond with anger, to see them as the sole cause of your pain. But the web reveals that their actions are also conditioned by their upbringing, by their wounds, by causes beyond their control. This does not excuse harm, but it opens the possibility of forgiveness. You see that just as you are caught in the web, so are they. Responding with hatred only strengthens harmful patterns. Responding with understanding begins to untangle them. The Buddha often taught that the greatest power is not to punish, but to break the cycle. When you choose not to continue a pattern of harm, you free yourself and others from repeating it. This is the highest trust in the universe. The trust that even when pain arises, you can choose not to plant more seeds of pain. You can end a cycle with your own awareness. That choice is the thread of freedom woven through the web. Karma also changes how you see success and failure. In the modern world, success is often measured by outcomes, wealth, recognition, achievement. But from the perspective of karma, what matters most are the causes you set in motion. You cannot always control whether your project succeeds, whether others appreciate your work, or whether your efforts bear fruit quickly. But you can control the integrity and intention behind your actions. When you act with clarity and compassion, you have already succeeded, because you have planted wholesome seeds. The fruit will ripen in its own way, in its own time, perhaps in ways you will never see. This perspective brings great peace. You no longer measure your worth by immediate results, but by the quality of your participation. Life becomes less about chasing outcomes and more about weaving wisely. Trust grows naturally when you know that every sincere effort has value, even if the results remain unseen. You begin to see yourself not as a failure when things do not go as planned, but as a weaver constantly shaping the web with each choice. The teaching of karma also invites humility. Because the web is vast, you can never fully see all the causes at play. This means you cannot claim full credit for success, nor full blame for failure. Every achievement arises from countless conditions: your teachers, your family, the society around you, even strangers who influenced your path without your knowing. When you realize this, gratitude blossoms. You see how much you owe to others, and how deeply interconnected your life truly is. Trusting the universe in this way softens the loneliness of existence. The sense that you are separate, struggling alone against the world, dissolves when you recognize the web. Your life is supported by countless invisible threads. The farmer who grew your food, the engineers who built the roads, the ancestors who carried forward knowledge and survival. Even the breath you take is shared with trees and oceans. Karma reveals that you are not isolated, you are woven into a vast, living whole. Finally, this teaching invites responsibility, but not the heavy, guilt-ridden responsibility of control. It is the responsibility of presence. Each moment is an opportunity to weave wisely. Each thought of kindness, each pause before anger, each act of generosity adds a new thread. The web does not demand perfection, it only reflects participation. The more conscious your participation, the stronger your trust in the universe becomes. You see that life is not about controlling the outcome, but about contributing to the harmony of the whole. So as you rest with this lesson, feel how the weight of punishment and fear dissolves. Karma is not a chain binding you, it is a web connecting you. Your life is not condemned by past mistakes, nor is it meaningless chaos. It is an unfolding tapestry, woven with threads of infinite causes, and every moment offers you a new strand to place. Trust grows when you know that your presence matters, that the universe responds to the seeds you plant, and that nothing is wasted. The web holds it all, weaving you into the great rhythm of existence. And in that rhythm, you can finally rest. The understanding of karma as a web leaves us with a quiet but powerful realization. Life is not random, yet it is also not permanent. Even the most carefully woven threads of cause and effect will not remain forever. Relationships shift, circumstances evolve, health changes, societies transform. Everything you touch, everything you know, even everything you are will one day pass. To the mind grasping for control, this feels terrifying. But to the heart that learns to trust, impermanence becomes the very key to freedom. Without change, there would be no healing, no growth, no possibility of renewal. The fleeting nature of reality is not something to fear, but something to lean on. Impermanence, or anicca in the Buddha's teaching, is the rhythm of existence. From the smallest cell in your body to the stars overhead, everything is in motion. This is not an abstract concept, but something you can see directly if you pay attention. The breath you are taking now was not the same as the one before it. The thought in your mind a moment ago is already gone. The cells in your body are continuously dying and being replaced. Even the earth beneath your feet is shifting, mountains rising and eroding, rivers carving new paths. Change is not an occasional interruption, it is the fabric of life itself. When we deny this truth, suffering arises. People cling to jobs as if they will last forever, to youth as if it will not fade, to loved ones as if they will never depart. When change inevitably comes, the mind panics. Grief deepens because we treated impermanence as betrayal rather than as the natural unfolding of conditions. To live in trust means shifting this perspective, welcoming impermanence as the very teacher that allows us to live fully. This recognition can transform how you meet loss. The death of a loved one, the end of a chapter in your life, the fading of a dream, all are painful. But pain does not have to become despair. Impermanence reminds you that the beauty of those experiences was inseparable from their fleeting nature. A flower's blossom touches us deeply precisely because it does not last. If it were permanent, it would lose its magic. In the same way, every moment of joy, every connection, every opportunity glows brighter when you see it as temporary. You no longer cling to it with desperation, but savor it with gratitude. Impermanence also reveals the futility of clinging to identity. People often say, "This is just who I am," as if the self were solid. Yet, if you look carefully, you will see that who you were 10 years ago is not who you are today. Your thoughts, your preferences, your fears, even your body, all have shifted countless times. The self is not a stone, it is a river. Trust arises when you stop fighting to hold on to a fixed identity and instead allow yourself to evolve. This opens the door to growth, forgiveness, and transformation, because you recognize that no mistake or role defines you forever. In relationships, this awareness softens attachment. Love deepens, not by pretending someone will stay unchanged, but by honoring the preciousness of shared time. Knowing that your partner, friend, or child will change allows you to meet them with curiosity, to rediscover them again and again, instead of imprisoning them in old expectations. Impermanence keeps love alive, because it reminds you never to take connection for granted. Impermanence also reshapes how we experience suffering itself. When pain grips you, whether physical or emotional, the thought that it will never end intensifies the torment. But when you rest in the truth of impermanence, you see that even the deepest wound shifts over time. No storm lasts forever. No feeling, however overwhelming, remains unchanged. This does not erase pain, but it changes your relationship with it. Instead of being crushed under its weight, you can endure with patience, knowing that change is inevitable. This insight brings enormous strength in difficult times. Survivors of hardship often speak of a turning point when they realized, "This will not last forever." That recognition itself is an act of trust. You learn to ride the waves instead of drowning in them. Buddhism calls this resilience, not because suffering disappears, but because you see it as a passing condition rather than as your eternal identity. Another dimension of impermanence is how it liberates us from greed. The endless chase for wealth, status, or possessions is fueled by the belief that these things will secure lasting happiness. But impermanence shows otherwise. Money comes and goes. Recognition fades. Bodies age, no matter how carefully preserved. When you embrace impermanence, you stop pouring energy into illusions of permanence. You begin to ask instead, what truly matters in this brief life? And the answer often turns toward connection, meaning, and inner peace rather than endless accumulation. Impermanence also changes how we relate to time. Many people postpone living, saying, "I'll be happy when I get that promotion, when I retire, when things settle down." But impermanence reminds us that waiting for life is dangerous, because the future is never guaranteed. Trusting impermanence means living now, tasting the fullness of each moment without postponement. It is not reckless, it is awake. It recognizes that this moment, fragile and fleeting, is the only certainty you ever have. This awareness deepens mindfulness. Every sip of tea, every step, every breath becomes worthy of attention. When you know it will not come again, you meet it with reverence. This is why Buddhist teachers encourage mindfulness of the ordinary, not because the ordinary is small, but because it is precious in its transience. Washing dishes, feeling the warmth of water on your hands, listening to the sound of birds at dawn, these are not distractions from life, but life itself. Impermanence reveals their sacredness. Impermanence also awakens compassion. When you realize that everyone is subject to loss, aging, and death, your heart softens. You see that the person who angers you is also fragile, also carrying the weight of change. This recognition does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps you respond with understanding rather than bitterness. Compassion grows when you recognize that we are all walking the same path of impermanence, each struggling to find peace in its midst. Death contemplation in Buddhism is not morbid but liberating. To face directly the reality that you will die one day frees you from distraction and trivial concerns. It sharpens your priorities and invites you to live authentically. Instead of fearing impermanence, you see it as the ground of meaning. Life's value lies not in its length, but in its depth, in the way you show up while you are here. This is why many practitioners repeat phrases such as, "Death is certain, the time is uncertain." Far from depressing, this truth infuses each day with urgency and wonder. Science also aligns with this teaching. Physics shows that the universe itself is in constant flux, from the smallest particles to the largest galaxies. Biology reveals the same in every cell. Neuroscience shows that even memories, once thought to be fixed, shift each time they are recalled. Impermanence is not just a spiritual teaching, it is the law of nature confirmed by observation. To deny it is to deny reality itself. Trust comes when you align with this truth rather than resist it. Impermanence can even transform ambition. Instead of striving for achievements as monuments to permanence, you begin to see them as contributions to a flowing river. You write not to create an eternal masterpiece, but to express truth in this moment. You build not to secure immortality, but to serve those alive now. This shift removes the burden of needing to prove yourself forever and replaces it with the joy of participating in life's unfolding. In practice, embracing impermanence involves letting go of clinging to outcomes. You still act, you still care, but you release the demand that things remain unchanged. When you succeed, you appreciate it without grasping. When you fail, you learn without despairing. Both success and failure lose their sharp edge because you know they too will pass. This equanimity is not cold detachment, but warm acceptance, rooted in trust that change is the nature of all things. One powerful meditation in Buddhism is observing the breath while repeating, "This too shall pass." Whether the breath is deep or shallow, calm or restless, it always shifts. Over time, this practice conditions the mind to meet all experiences the same way. Joy arises, "This too shall pass." Sorrow arises, "This too shall pass." Instead of swinging wildly between craving and aversion, you rest in the middle, trusting impermanence as your guide. Impermanence also invites creativity. When you stop expecting stability, you open yourself to innovation. Artists often say their best work arises when they surrender control and allow change to guide the process. Life itself becomes art when you meet it the same way, open to surprise, willing to be reshaped. Trust grows not because the future is predictable, but because you are willing to meet it as it comes. This teaching also dismantles the fear of letting go. People hold on to old habits, toxic relationships, or outdated beliefs because they fear emptiness if they release them. But impermanence teaches that letting go always makes space for something new. A tree must shed leaves to grow again in spring. You too must release what no longer serves you to allow new life to enter. Trust is knowing that the cycle of renewal never fails, even if you cannot yet see what will bloom. The ultimate gift of impermanence is liberation from fear of the unknown. When you realize that everything is already in motion, you stop demanding certainty. Instead of clinging to what is passing, you open your hands and participate. You step into the flow not as its master but as its companion. Trust becomes second nature because you know that change is not against you. It is the very rhythm that sustains you. As you rest with this truth, notice how the fear of ending softens. Endings are not failures. They are the gateways through which new beginnings enter. The night does not destroy the day, it prepares the dawn. The falling leaf does not signal death alone. It nourishes the soil for future growth. Impermanence is the pulse of the universe, and when you lean into it, you find peace not in clinging but in flowing. To trust impermanence is to live awake, free from the chains of fear and attachment. It is to see beauty in the fleeting, strength in the changing, and hope in the uncertain. When you no longer resist the truth of anicca, you discover that life does not need to last forever to be meaningful. Its very transience is what makes it sacred, and in that recognition you find not despair, but trust, the quiet faith that every ending carries the seed of a beginning, and that the universe, ever-changing, is guiding you through it all. When impermanence settles into the heart, you begin to see that change is not simply random collapse, but part of a greater unfolding. The fading of one thing allows the arising of another, and beneath what looks like chaos there is an order that holds everything together. This is where another profound teaching enters, pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination. It reveals that nothing exists on its own, and nothing arises without conditions. To trust the universe is to understand that even in moments of uncertainty, there is a hidden structure, a web of causes and effects, connecting all things in ways deeper than the eye can see. This teaching shows us that everything in life is interwoven. A flower does not bloom by itself. It relies on sunlight, rain, soil, air, and countless unseen conditions that came before. Your very breath right now is possible because of the green life on this planet, because of oceans that generate oxygen, because of stars that burned billions of years ago to create the elements in your body. What appears as a single moment is actually the meeting point of infinite threads. This is not mystical thinking, but the very way reality unfolds. When life feels chaotic, it is often because we see only fragments. A setback appears senseless until you notice the larger field of causes that shaped it. A painful ending feels cruel until you see the space it created for growth you did not expect. Dependent origination invites you to widen your lens, to see not just isolated events but the whole network that gives rise to them. This shift transforms fear into trust, because you realize nothing is truly random. There is always a chain of interdependent conditions at play. The Buddha described dependent origination as the foundation of wisdom. He pointed out that suffering arises not from fate or punishment, but from conditions. Craving arises from ignorance. Clinging arises from craving. Suffering arises from clinging. And just as conditions create suffering, conditions can also end it. Wisdom, compassion, mindfulness, all of these can interrupt the cycle and bring freedom. This shows that nothing is fixed. If conditions change, outcomes change. Life is not locked into chaos or despair. It is always open to transformation. Understanding this in daily life helps dissolve despair. When hardship strikes, the mind often cries, "Why me? Why now?" But dependent origination teaches that events are not personal attacks. They are results of countless conditions, many beyond your control. A storm destroys a harvest, not because the farmer is cursed, but because weather, soil, and climate all interrelate in complex ways. By seeing events as conditional rather than personal, you free yourself from bitterness. Trust arises when you accept that life unfolds according to causes, not according to judgment. This understanding also invites responsibility. While you cannot control every condition, you can influence the web through your actions. Choosing kindness instead of anger, patience instead of haste, wisdom instead of ignorance, all these shift the conditions for future experiences. Every mindful act adds a thread to the larger fabric. You may not see the outcome immediately, but the law of dependent origination ensures that no action is wasted. This awareness empowers you. Instead of feeling trapped by chaos, you recognize your capacity to shape conditions skillfully. Dependent origination also reveals why blame is unhelpful. When someone causes harm, it is easy to focus on them as the single cause. But their behavior too is the product of conditions, their upbringing, their wounds, their ignorance, the culture around them. This does not excuse harm, but it shifts the lens from condemnation to understanding. By seeing the web of conditions, you cultivate compassion. You see that anger only creates more harmful conditions, while understanding and wise action have the power to change the cycle. On a deeper level, this teaching dissolves the illusion of separateness. We often live as if we were independent entities, self-made and self-contained. But dependent origination shows that no one exists apart from others. Your very body is a collection of elements that once belonged to rivers, stars, and soil. Your thoughts are shaped by languages, traditions, and teachers that came before you. Even the sense of I arises from conditions of perception and memory. This insight is humbling and liberating. It reveals that your life is not a solitary struggle, but part of a vast, interconnected dance. Trust in the universe grows naturally from this recognition. When you see the web of interdependence, you realize that you are supported in ways you never noticed. The food on your table, the roof over your head, the knowledge you use, all are fruits of countless beings and forces. Even in times of uncertainty, this web sustains you. You are not alone. Life is not chaos without meaning. It is a network of interrelated causes constantly giving rise to new possibilities. This insight also transforms how you meet uncertainty. When things do not go as planned, the mind sees only disorder. But dependent origination reveals that what feels like disorder may be conditions shifting in ways you cannot yet perceive. A door closes, and you see only loss. Yet that closure may create conditions for growth or opportunities that would not otherwise appear. This does not mean every painful event is secretly good, but it does mean every event arises from a web that is larger than your immediate view. Trust deepens when you remember that the order behind chaos is always at work, even when hidden. This teaching also reshapes how you approach goals. Instead of obsessing over outcomes, you focus on nurturing the right conditions. A gardener does not force a seed to grow by command. They prepare the soil, water it, provide sunlight, and trust that the conditions will allow growth. In the same way, you cultivate patience, practice compassion, develop mindfulness, and let results ripen naturally. This way of living replaces anxiety with trust, because you understand your role, not to control outcomes, but to create conditions for harmony. Dependent origination also illuminates the nature of emotions. Feelings do not appear out of nowhere. They are conditioned by thoughts, memories, and bodily states. Anger arises when expectations clash with reality. Joy arises when connection and gratitude align. By seeing emotions as conditional, you no longer identify with them as fixed identities. Instead of saying, "I am angry," you can see conditions for anger have arisen. This subtle shift creates space. You can respond with awareness instead of being swept away. Trust grows because you know emotions are not permanent states, but conditional processes that can change when conditions change. Modern science reflects this wisdom. Systems theory in ecology shows that ecosystems thrive or collapse based on interdependent relationships. Neuroscience reveals that brain patterns arise from conditions of environment and experience. Physics demonstrates that even particles do not exist independently, but in relation to other forces. Buddhism anticipated these insights centuries ago, teaching that reality is not made of isolated parts but of relationships. Trust in the universe becomes natural when you realize you are living in a relational field rather than a chaotic void. This understanding also reshapes how we approach community. In a culture that often glorifies independence, dependent origination reminds us that flourishing comes from interdependence. Just as a tree cannot grow without soil and rain, a human cannot thrive without support, connection, and care. Recognizing this reduces shame in seeking help and deepens gratitude for those who support you. It also inspires generosity, knowing that your actions ripple through the web of conditions to uplift others. Even suffering itself can be transformed through this teaching. The Buddha explained that suffering arises from specific conditions: craving, ignorance, clinging. This means suffering is not an eternal curse, but a conditional state. By changing the conditions, suffering can end. This is the essence of liberation. It is not magic, but a shift in causes. When wisdom replaces ignorance, when compassion replaces hatred, when letting go replaces clinging, suffering loses its fuel. This truth gives profound hope. No matter how tangled life feels, freedom is always possible because conditions can always shift. This perspective also dismantles the fear of chaos in global events. Wars, crises, and upheavals seem like pure disorder. But dependent origination shows they arise from conditions: greed, ignorance, fear, inequality. Addressing these conditions at their roots is more effective than despairing at the surface. Just as harmful conditions create turmoil, wise conditions can create peace. This perspective invites you to trust that collective change is possible when enough people contribute to shifting the web. On a personal level, this teaching brings humility and compassion toward your own mistakes. Instead of labeling yourself as broken, you can see that your patterns of thought and behavior arise from conditions. Perhaps they came from childhood wounds, cultural pressures, or past experiences. This does not excuse harmful actions, but it opens the door to healing. By changing present conditions through practice, support, and awareness, you can reshape the future. Trust deepens because you realize you are not fixed. You are conditioned, and conditions can always evolve. Dependent origination also encourages a deeper awareness of daily choices. You begin to see that every action, however small, participates in the web. A harsh word creates conditions for hurt. A moment of patience creates conditions for peace. A single act of generosity may ripple far beyond what you can see. This awareness transforms ordinary life into sacred participation. Each moment becomes an opportunity to weave conditions that nurture harmony, both within yourself and in the larger world. In meditation, this teaching is experienced directly. As you sit and observe, you notice how thoughts arise not from nowhere, but from subtle conditions, sounds, memories, bodily sensations. You see how craving pulls one thought after another, how awareness interrupts the cycle. This direct experience dissolves the illusion of randomness. Even the stream of the mind is conditional. Seeing this brings calm, because you no longer fear your thoughts as uncontrollable chaos. You trust the process, knowing you can influence conditions with mindfulness. Ultimately, dependent origination reveals a profound order beneath the surface of life. What seems chaotic is not without pattern. What seems meaningless is not without connection. To trust the universe is to align with this order, not by trying to map every thread, which is impossible, but by recognizing that no event stands alone. Each moment is a meeting point of infinite causes, and each choice you make contributes to future causes. This recognition transforms fear into faith, despair into possibility, and isolation into belonging. So as you let this teaching sink in, feel how the anxiety of randomness begins to fade. Life is not a storm of disconnected fragments. It is a vast, interconnected unfolding, where every thread has its place and every condition shapes the next. You are not drifting alone in chaos. You are part of a living web, supported by conditions seen and unseen, always shifting, always guiding, always offering the chance to weave harmony. And in that recognition, trust arises naturally, the trust that beneath the apparent disorder, there is always order waiting to be seen. When you begin to see dependent origination as the hidden order beneath apparent chaos, a new question arises naturally. If everything is interwoven, what does it mean to live wisely within this web? The answer does not point only to personal liberation, but to something greater, the vow to serve others as inseparable from serving oneself. This is where the path of the bodhisattva appears, not as an abstract idea but as a living leap of trust. It is a trust so profound that one places the well-being of all beings before personal escape, relying on the universe's wisdom to carry that vow. The bodhisattva path begins with the recognition that self and other are not separate. When you understand dependent origination deeply, the boundaries of me and them soften. The suffering of another reverberates through the whole web. Your own joy is touched by the joy of others. To work only for your own liberation while ignoring others becomes impossible, because the web cannot be healed in fragments. Trusting this truth, the bodhisattva vows to walk the path, not alone, but for the benefit of all, knowing that freedom is collective. This leap requires immense courage. The ordinary mind clings to safety, to securing its own comfort before considering others. The bodhisattva, however, trusts that by turning outward, by making compassion the center one, aligns with the deepest current of the universe. This trust is not naive. It is based on the recognition that the universe itself sustains through interdependence. Just as trees give oxygen without asking, rivers flow without withholding, and the sun radiates light without condition, so too can a human heart participate in this boundless giving. To live in this way is to harmonize with the rhythm of life itself. The vow to save others before oneself is not about martyrdom or self-neglect. It is about seeing that in lifting others, you are lifted as well, because no boundary truly separates you. The bodhisattva trusts that compassion is not depletion, but renewal. Every act of service deepens strength rather than drains it, because it arises from alignment with universal truth. This is why great masters, even when physically frail, radiated boundless energy. Their lives were fueled not by personal striving, but by the inexhaustible current of compassion. This path also transforms how you understand trust. Ordinary trust often means believing things will work out for you personally, but the bodhisattva's trust expands far beyond the individual. It is a trust that no effort of compassion is wasted, even if results are unseen. A kind word may prevent despair in someone you never meet again. A gesture of generosity may ripple into countless acts of goodness. The bodhisattva does not measure success by immediate outcomes, but trusts the law of interconnection to carry seeds of compassion where they are needed. This vow also reshapes the meaning of patience. To commit to liberating all beings means acknowledging that the task is endless. Beings are numberless, suffering arises endlessly, conditions constantly shift. Yet, the bodhisattva embraces this impossibility with joy, trusting that the vow itself sustains. The power lies not in completion, but in devotion. Each act of compassion is complete in itself, even as the vow extends without limit. This patience is born of trust that the journey matters more than reaching a final end. The bodhisattva's leap is also a leap beyond fear. Fear arises when we focus narrowly on the self, anxious about loss, pain, or death. But when the heart expands to include all beings, the self is no longer the fragile center. Concern shifts outward, and fear dissolves into purpose. Trust in universal wisdom replaces the need for personal guarantees. Even death itself is no longer terrifying, because the vow continues beyond a single lifetime. This is why bodhisattvas are depicted as fearless, not because they are immune to pain, but because their trust in compassion transcends personal survival. In practical life, this path invites you to expand perspective in each moment. When frustration arises, ask not only, "How do I protect myself?" but also, "How can this response reduce suffering for all involved?" When making choices, consider not only your gain, but the well-being of the wider web. This does not require grand sacrifices. It begins with small acts of awareness. The bodhisattva's trust is practiced every time you pause before speaking harshly, every time you choose generosity over greed, every time you remember that your life is part of something larger. One of the most profound aspects of this vow is its reliance on faith in unseen effects. You may never know how your actions shape others. A moment of kindness may ripple through generations. A lesson taught to a child may echo decades later. Trusting this unseen continuity allows you to act without attachment to recognition. The bodhisattva path is quiet, often unnoticed, but its effects are vast. This trust frees you from the demand for immediate validation, anchoring your life in deeper meaning. The vow also teaches the difference between pity and compassion. Pity sees others as separate and inferior. Compassion recognizes shared humanity. The bodhisattva does not help from above, but serves from within the web, trusting that connection itself heals. This attitude prevents burnout, because it arises from equality rather than superiority. Compassion replenishes itself when rooted in shared being. Trusting this truth allows you to give without exhaustion, to serve without resentment. The bodhisattva's leap also challenges the idea that trust in the universe means passive acceptance. It is not about retreating into personal peace while the world suffers. True trust means believing the universe supports compassion, that acting with wisdom and kindness is not futile, even when problems seem overwhelming. A bodhisattva faces the world's suffering directly, not with despair, but with faith, that every drop of compassion nourishes the whole ocean. This vow also transforms how you view enemies. Those who harm others are themselves caught in conditions of ignorance and suffering. To respond only with hatred perpetuates the cycle. The bodhisattva trusts that compassion, even for those who cause harm, is the path to breaking cycles of violence. This does not mean tolerating injustice. It means responding with actions rooted in wisdom rather than vengeance. Such trust is radical. It refuses to let darkness dictate your heart. The bodhisattva path also deepens humility. To vow to save all beings is to acknowledge that you are part of the same struggle. You do not stand apart as a savior, but as a companion. Trust arises when you know you do not carry the burden alone. Countless others, past and present, share the same vow, weaving together a field of compassion that spans time and space. This collective strength supports you, reminding you that your efforts are joined to something greater. This leap also transforms how you experience meaning. Many people seek purpose in achievements, possessions, or recognition. But the bodhisattva's purpose is simple and inexhaustible: to reduce suffering and nurture awakening. This purpose does not fade with age, loss, or changing circumstances. It remains alive as long as there are beings to serve. Trust in this purpose carries you through the ups and downs of personal life, offering stability where other forms of meaning falter. Another dimension of this trust is the willingness to act without certainty. The bodhisattva steps into situations without knowing the outcome, guided only by compassion. This leap requires faith that universal wisdom will carry the effort where it needs to go. Sometimes actions bear immediate fruit, sometimes they appear to fail. But the bodhisattva trusts that no act of compassion is ever lost. The web of interdependence ensures that each seed contributes to the greater whole. This vow also dissolves the illusion of scarcity. The self fears that giving will leave it depleted, that caring for others means losing for oneself. But the bodhisattva discovers that generosity expands the heart. The more you give, the more capacity you discover. Trusting this truth allows you to live abundantly, even with little, because your wealth is measured not in possessions, but in the depth of your compassion. The leap of trust also transforms how you approach spiritual practice. Many traditions emphasize meditation for personal peace. The bodhisattva, however, practices for the benefit of all beings. Each breath, each insight, each moment of mindfulness is dedicated outward. This transforms practice from self-centered effort into universal offering. Trust grows when you see your practice not as isolated progress, but as nourishment for the whole web. At its deepest level, the bodhisattva vow reflects trust in the nature of awakening itself. The Buddha taught that all beings possess the seed of enlightenment. No one is excluded, no matter how lost they appear. The bodhisattva trusts this truth absolutely, seeing the potential for awakening in every being. This vision transforms how you relate to others. Instead of labeling people as hopeless or evil, you hold faith in their hidden potential. This trust itself becomes a force that helps awaken it. The bodhisattva path is not easy. It demands patience, humility, and a willingness to endure uncertainty. But it offers a depth of meaning that no personal achievement can match. To live for the well-being of all is to align with the deepest current of the universe. This trust carries you through hardship, fuels your compassion, and grounds your purpose. It transforms life from a narrow struggle for survival into a vast offering of service. So as you rest with this teaching, let the leap of trust settle into your heart. It is the recognition that you are not separate, that your life is bound to the lives of all beings. It is the vow to live not just for yourself, but for the healing of the whole web. And it is the trust that universal wisdom supports every act of compassion, no matter how small. In this vow, fear dissolves, meaning deepens, and trust becomes unshakable, the trust that by serving others, you discover the truest expression of yourself. The bodhisattva's vow to place others before oneself is already an act of profound trust, but it raises a deeper challenge. How can anyone walk such a vast path when the future is unknown, when outcomes cannot be guaranteed, when the world itself resists certainty? The answer comes not from clinging to strategies or securing final answers, but from entering what Zen calls don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but the opposite, a fearless openness to the mystery of life. It is the trust that wisdom does not arise from holding tightly to conclusions, but from allowing space for the unknown to speak. In Zen practice, don't know mind is the foundation of clarity. The ordinary mind seeks to label, categorize, and predict. It wants to know who is right, what will happen, and how to secure control. But this habit of clinging to certainty often blinds us to reality as it actually island. When you already know, you stop listening. When you think you have all the answers, you miss the subtle truths unfolding in the present. Don't know mind invites you to release this grasping, to meet life with humility and freshness, trusting that not knowing is closer to reality than false certainty. This surrender is not weakness. It takes enormous courage to admit, "I don't know." The ego resists, fearing that uncertainty means inadequacy. But in truth, uncertainty is the natural state of life. The future is never guaranteed, outcomes are never fully predictable, and the universe is far more complex than any single mind can grasp. To live pretending otherwise is to build walls against reality. To surrender to not knowing is to align with how life actually works. This alignment breeds trust, because you no longer fight against the flow of uncertainty, you step into it with openness. In daily life, don't know mind can transform even simple interactions. When you meet another person, you may believe you already know who they are based on past encounters, labels, or assumptions. But if you release that, if you approach them with don't know mind, you meet them freshly, you listen more deeply, you discover details you would have overlooked. Trust grows in relationships when people feel seen without being boxed into old judgments. This practice allows space for others to change, just as you also change. In times of crisis, don't know mind becomes even more essential. When plans collapse or life takes a sudden turn, the impulse is to panic, to demand certainty, to scramble for answers. But often no immediate answer exists. The future has not yet revealed itself. In these moments, surrendering to don't know mind allows you to rest in openness rather than in fear. It creates space for creativity, patience, and resilience. Trust arises not because you know what will happen, but because you accept that you don't, and you are willing to move step by step anyway. Zen teachers often say that don't know mind is the closest mind to awakening. This is because awakening is not a matter of adding more knowledge, but of seeing directly. Knowledge is useful, but it can become a barrier when it hardens into rigid concepts. Don't know mind loosens these barriers, allowing you to encounter life directly, unfiltered. A flower is not reduced to a plant of this species. It is simply seen in its freshness. A moment of silence is not filled with concepts of boredom or productivity. It is simply silence. Trust in the universe deepens when you meet life this way, because you no longer demand it conform to your ideas. You let it be what it island. This attitude also dismantles the fear of failure. Much anxiety comes from the belief that you must know exactly how to succeed, that mistakes mean disaster. But with don't know mind, mistakes are simply part of the unfolding. They are conditions that teach, redirect, and refine. When you release the demand to always know, you become free to try, to explore, to experiment. Trust replaces fear because you no longer require certainty before taking a step. Each step is taken with openness, learning along the way. Another dimension of don't know mind is its capacity to dissolve conflict. Arguments often arise because people cling to certainty about being right. Each side defends their knowledge, unwilling to admit limits. But when you approach with don't know mind, you become curious rather than combative. You listen for nuance, for possibilities beyond rigid positions. This does not mean abandoning discernment, but it means recognizing that no single perspective contains the whole truth. Trust grows in dialogue, when humility replaces arrogance, when openness allows common ground to emerge. In spiritual practice, don't know mind is cultivated through meditation. When you sit and notice thoughts, the mind often rushes to interpret, this is good, this is bad, this means I am progressing, this means I am failing. But if you release all of that, if you simply notice with openness, you meet the present without judgment. You rest in awareness itself, which needs no conclusions. Over time, this trains the mind to relax its constant grasping for certainty. Trust arises naturally because awareness itself proves sufficient, even without answers. This approach also nurtures creativity. Artists, thinkers, and innovators often describe breakthroughs occurring when they release expectations and allow themselves to sit in the unknown. Don't know mind creates the spaciousness where new possibilities appear. When you stop demanding that life fit your preconceived answers, you open to insights that were previously hidden. Trust in this process allows you to engage life as an unfolding mystery rather than a problem to be solved. The teaching also applies to mortality. Much fear of death arises from the demand to know what happens after. Religions and philosophies offer various answers, but in truth, no one fully knows. Don't know. Mind invites you to rest in that mystery without fear. Death becomes not a terrifying unknown, but a vast openness. Trust arises when you no longer need guarantees, but accept the mystery as part of life's flow. This surrender brings peace, even in the face of the ultimate uncertainty. In modern life, where information is abundant and people prize certainty, don't know mind can feel radical. But information is not the same as wisdom. You can collect endless data and still miss the truth of a single breath. Don't know mind reminds you that wisdom arises not from accumulating facts, but from meeting each moment directly. Trust grows when you let go of the illusion that you must always know, and instead cultivate presence. On a psychological level, don't know mind also helps release perfectionism. Perfectionists crave certainty, needing to guarantee outcomes before they act. This often leads to paralysis or burnout. But when you accept not knowing, you allow yourself to move forward without needing perfection. Progress becomes possible because you trust the process rather than demand absolute assurance. Each step is taken lightly, with curiosity instead of pressure. This teaching also heals relationships with the future. Many live in constant anxiety, projecting worst-case scenarios, needing certainty about how things will unfold. Don't know mind invites you to release those projections. The future has not yet come, and no amount of worry will create certainty. To rest in don't know mind is to accept that the future is open, filled with possibilities you cannot predict. Trust in this openness frees you from the cage of fear. Zen masters often embody this teaching through simple words. When asked about the meaning of life, a master might respond, "Don't know." Far from dismissive, this response points to the humility required for true insight. By admitting not knowing, the master invites the student into direct experience rather than second-hand answers. This humility is itself a form of trust, a willingness to let life reveal itself without forcing conclusions. This practice also connects deeply with compassion. When you meet someone suffering, the impulse is often to explain, to give answers. But sometimes the greatest gift is to sit with them in don't know mind, offering presence rather than solutions. This humility creates space for genuine connection, where both can trust the unfolding without pressure to fix. It is a reminder that trust is not always about answers, but often about companionship in uncertainty. Don't know mind also cultivates resilience in times of collective uncertainty, economic upheavals, social unrest, environmental crises. The temptation is to demand absolute predictions, to seek leaders or systems that promise certainty. But such promises often collapse, leaving despair. Don't know mind accepts that uncertainty is inherent in collective life as well. From this acceptance, resilience grows. Communities can respond with flexibility, adaptability, and trust rather than panic. On the deepest level, don't know mind dismantles the illusion of control. Control depends on knowing outcomes, knowing paths, knowing identities. When you release this need, you discover a freedom that cannot be shaken. Life becomes a field of openness, where each moment is fresh, unbound by rigid expectations. Trust arises not because you know what will happen, but because you no longer need to. As you rest in this teaching, Notice how your shoulders soften, how your breath deepens, the pressure to know, to answer, to secure dissolves. In its place is openness, humility, and peace. This is the fearless trust of don't know mind, the trust that the universe does not require you to have all the answers, only to be present, open, and willing. And in that openness, wisdom flows naturally, like a river unblocked at last. When the mind surrenders to not knowing, a deeper form of patience begins to take root. If we are free from the need for certainty, we also learn to release the demand for speed. Life does not always unfold on our schedule, and wisdom lies in trusting that causes ripen in their own time. This is what Buddhism calls the Dharma of timing. It is not passive waiting, but an active faith that every seed, once planted, will bear fruit when conditions are right, not when desire insists. The Dharma of timing begins with an understanding of cause and effect as a living law. Nothing appears out of nowhere. Each moment arises because of countless conditions converging, like waves meeting on the surface of the sea. But those conditions do not ripen instantly. The seed does not bloom the day it touches soil, the child does not grow into adulthood overnight, and suffering does not transform into wisdom in a single breath. The natural law of ripening cannot be rushed. To demand otherwise is to fight reality itself. Trust is cultivated when we learn to rest in this rhythm. Patience in Buddhism is not merely tolerance, it is wisdom. It recognizes that unseen forces are always at work beneath the surface. When you practice generosity, you may not see the results immediately, but the act sets into motion ripples that move far beyond your view. When you train the mind through meditation, the changes may be subtle at first, but over time, they reshape your very way of being. To trust the Dharma of timing is to know that every sincere effort has value, even if results remain hidden for years. This patience also prevents despair when progress feels slow. Many people abandon practice or self-cultivation because they do not see instant transformation. They mistake delayed ripening for failure. But the Dharma of timing reminds us that transformation often happens silently, like roots growing underground before a sprout breaks through. What looks like stillness is often preparation. Trust grows when you recognize that unseen causes are weaving outcomes even when nothing appears to change on the surface. This truth applies not only to personal growth, but also to relationships. How often do we demand others change on our schedule, expecting them to overcome habits or heal wounds quickly? But each person ripens at their own pace, conditioned by countless factors. Patience here is not resignation, but respect for the complexity of another's path. By trusting the timing of others, you create space for genuine growth rather than forcing shallow compliance. Compassion deepens when you release the demand that others unfold according to your clock. The Dharma of timing also transforms how we handle disappointment. When plans fail or opportunities collapse, the mind often concludes that effort was wasted. But what if those events are simply causes that have not yet ripened? What if what looks like failure is only part of a longer chain that will bear fruit later? To trust timing is to resist the urge to declare final judgments about the value of an experience. Every event can become nourishment when understood as part of a larger unfolding. This teaching also cultivates humility. Our view of timing is often narrow, confined to immediate wants, but the universe operates on scales far larger than our personal desires. A tree may take decades to grow strong, an ecosystem centuries to balance, a culture generations to heal. To demand instant results is to mistake your limited view for the whole. Humility accepts that life's timing often exceeds what the individual can grasp. Trust is the willingness to participate without demanding to control the pace. Another dimension of this teaching is faith in resilience. Seeds do not always sprout in harsh soil, but they can lie dormant for years, waiting for the right conditions. In the same way, wisdom and compassion may seem buried in a person or community, but under the right circumstances, they emerge. This faith prevents despair, even when darkness appears overwhelming. You trust that no act of goodness is lost, that even if unseen now, its potential remains alive, waiting to ripen. This perspective also dissolves the anxiety of urgency. Modern life glorifies speed, demanding quick fixes and immediate gratification. But such urgency often leads to shallow solutions that collapse quickly. The Dharma of timing invites depth over speed. It teaches that the most enduring transformations take time: healing, forgiveness, insight, maturity. When you stop demanding instant results, you can focus on creating the right conditions and let time do its work. Trust grows as you learn that lasting change cannot be rushed. The Dharma of timing also applies to the path of practice itself. In meditation, the mind often wanders and progress feels elusive. But each moment of returning is a seed. Even when the mind feels restless, practice accumulates beneath the surface. Over months and years, the fruits become clear calm, clarity, compassion. To trust timing is to keep practicing without clinging to results, knowing that causes ripen when they are ready. The path unfolds through steady commitment, not instant breakthroughs. This teaching also reshapes how we view collective change. Social injustice, environmental crisis, and conflict often seem immovable. But history shows that conditions shift over time, often unpredictably. Movements that once seemed impossible eventually transform societies. Trust in the Dharma of timing means continuing to act with integrity, even when results are slow. Each effort contributes to conditions that may ripen in ways you cannot foresee. This perspective prevents despair and fuels perseverance. Patience in this sense is not passive waiting, it is active trust. A farmer does not plant seeds and sit idle. They water, tend, and protect the soil, knowing that growth takes time. In the same way, you cultivate wisdom, compassion, and presence daily, trusting that results will ripen naturally. This balance of effort and patience is the essence of the Dharma of timing, doing what you can without forcing what you cannot. Another gift of this teaching is peace with endings. Sometimes causes ripen into closure rather than continuation. A relationship ends, a season of life concludes, a dream dissolves. Instead of resisting, trust in timing allows you to accept endings as natural fruits of conditions. Just as leaves fall when their time is complete, aspects of life must pass to make room for new growth. This trust transforms grief into gratitude, allowing you to honor what was without clinging to what must pass. The Dharma of timing also helps free you from envy. When others succeed before you, the mind may burn with comparison. But trusting timing reminds you that everyone ripens at a different pace. Another's harvest does not diminish your own seeds. By respecting the rhythm of your life, you release the poison of envy and focus on cultivating your own conditions. Trust here is knowing that your path will unfold when the time is right, without needing to match anyone else's schedule. This perspective also brings wisdom to decision-making. Often people rush choices out of fear of missing out. But when you trust timing, you learn to pause, to let clarity ripen before acting. Some opportunities require patience to reveal their true nature. Acting too soon can distort outcomes, while waiting allows conditions to mature. Trusting the ripening of causes helps you act with precision rather than haste, aligning with the deeper rhythm of life. This teaching also illuminates forgiveness. Anger and resentment often feel impossible to release instantly, but forgiveness ripens over time as understanding deepens and the heart softens. Forcing it prematurely only leads to pretense. Trusting timing allows you to hold space for healing, knowing that even hardened hearts can soften when conditions mature. Patience with yourself and others is an act of compassion rooted in this trust. The Dharma of timing even applies to wisdom itself. Insights do not arrive on command. They ripen through experience, reflection, and openness. A teaching you hear today may not touch you deeply until years later, when life conditions make you ready to receive it. This is why the same words can suddenly feel profound at a different moment. Trusting timing allows you to remain open, knowing that wisdom comes when you are ready, not when you demand it. Finally, this teaching brings peace with mortality. Just as birth requires conditions, so does death. When life has ripened fully, death comes as part of the cycle. Trusting timing means accepting even this with dignity, knowing that the universe unfolds according to causes far greater than personal desire. Death is not a failure of timing, but its completion. Trust arises when you see it as part of the great rhythm, allowing you to live more fully while you are here. So as you rest with this truth, let go of the pressure to control the pace of your life. Seeds ripen when they are ready, not when impatience commands. Efforts bear fruit in their time, not always in your sight. The Dharma of timing is the wisdom of patience, the faith that unseen causes are always working, and the trust that nothing is wasted. By aligning with this rhythm, you free yourself from anxiety, cultivate resilience, and discover peace in the unfolding of life, exactly as it island. When you begin to understand the Dharma of timing, patience blossoms as trust in the natural ripening of causes. Yet even with patience, there is still a subtle thread that binds the heart, the attachment to outcomes. Waiting quietly for results is not the same as being free from needing those results to validate your life. True freedom comes when you release ownership over what happens, when your worth no longer depends on whether events unfold as you wished. This is the path of non-attachment, and it is one of the deepest expressions of faith in the universe. Non-attachment does not mean indifference. It does not mean closing your heart or ceasing to care. Instead, it means participating fully while letting go of the demand to control results. You plant seeds, you nurture them with effort, but you release the need to claim the fruit as yours. This is faith at its purest, because it places trust not in outcomes, but in the act itself, in the living flow of the universe. At the root of attachment is the belief that outcomes define you. Success or failure becomes personal identity, gain or loss becomes proof of worth. This entanglement fuels anxiety and fear, because outcomes are never fully under your control. Even with effort, conditions beyond your reach shape what unfolds. Non-attachment recognizes this and frees you from bondage to results. When your identity no longer hinges on what happens, you act with clarity instead of desperation. This freedom transforms the way you engage with work. Many people pursue goals with clenched fists, measuring their value by achievements or recognition, but non-attachment shifts the focus to process. The meaning lies in showing up, in practicing integrity, in aligning with values. Whether others praise or criticize, whether results are visible or hidden, the act itself carries its own wholeness. Work becomes service rather than self-validation. Trust grows because you know that effort rooted in sincerity never goes to waste, even if outcomes differ from expectation. In relationships, attachment often appears as clinging to how others should act, speak, or feel. This clinging leads to disappointment, resentment, and control. Non-attachment honors connection without possession. It allows others to be free, to grow, to change, without making their choices a threat to your worth. Love deepens when it is freed from ownership. The heart opens more fully when it releases the illusion that another person can be held like an object. Trust here means believing that connection does not require control, that real intimacy thrives when space is allowed. Non-attachment also transforms how you meet suffering. Pain often multiplies because of clinging, the insistence that things should be other than they are. Loss is painful, but the refusal to let go of what is gone turns pain into prolonged suffering. When you practice non-attachment, you acknowledge grief without resistance. You allow endings to be what they are, trusting that new beginnings are always possible. Faith deepens when you realize that letting go does not mean emptiness, but space for renewal. This teaching also reshapes your relationship with possessions. Material attachment breeds insecurity, because no object can truly provide lasting security. Wealth may disappear, objects may decay, but clinging to them fuels fear of loss. Non-attachment allows you to use and enjoy what you have without mistaking it for identity or permanence. This does not mean rejecting possessions, but relating to them lightly. Ownership dissolves into stewardship, where you care for what is in your hands, but do not make it the anchor of your being. Trust grows when you discover that contentment arises from within, not from accumulation. Another subtle form of attachment is the craving for certainty. The mind wants to own the future, to guarantee outcomes, to hold life in predictable patterns, but the future cannot be possessed. Non-attachment here means releasing the demand for certainty and living with openness. You make plans, but you hold them lightly. You take steps, but you release the need for guarantees. Faith deepens when you see that the universe does not need to conform to your script in order for life to unfold meaningfully. Non-attachment also reveals a profound truth about identity. Much suffering comes from clinging to a fixed idea of self. I am this role, this status, this image. But the self is fluid, shaped by shifting conditions. When you cling to identity, you resist growth and change. Non-attachment allows the self to evolve freely. You no longer need to defend an image or control how others perceive you. Trust arises when you see that who you are is not a fixed possession, but an unfolding process, part of the larger flow of existence. This teaching also heals perfectionism. Perfectionism is attachment to flawless outcomes, the belief that only perfect results justify effort. But perfection is an illusion, and chasing it breeds exhaustion. Non-attachment releases this demand, allowing you to act sincerely without fear of imperfection. Mistakes become teachers rather than threats. Trust deepens when you see that growth matters more than flawlessness, and that even imperfect steps contribute to the whole. The practice of meditation offers direct training in non-attachment. Thoughts and sensations arise and pass, but clinging to them creates turbulence. When you notice a thought and let it go without chasing it, you practice releasing ownership. Over time, this habit spills into daily life. Emotions, outcomes, relationships, all can be met with openness rather than grasping. Meditation teaches the faith that life can unfold without the constant need to grasp and control. Non-attachment also transforms the experience of joy. Many people fear happiness because they cling to it, desperate to make it last. This clinging often shortens joy, turning it into anxiety about its end. But when you practice non-attachment, joy is savored in the moment, without demanding permanence. It becomes richer precisely because it is allowed to pass naturally. Trust grows when you see that joy will come again, that life continually offers new moments of sweetness without needing to freeze them. This perspective also dissolves envy and comparison. Attachment to outcomes fuels comparison. Why do they have what I don't? But non-attachment recognizes that each path unfolds according to unique conditions. You release the demand that your outcomes mirror another's. Instead, you focus on your own sincere participation. Trust arises when you stop competing with the universe and begin cooperating with it, accepting your path as sufficient. Non-attachment even applies to spiritual progress. Many seekers cling to milestones, to insights, to experiences of clarity. But clinging to spiritual achievements becomes another form of bondage. The moment you claim ownership, "I attained this, I am enlightened," the freshness disappears. Non-attachment means releasing even the desire to grasp awakening as a possession. Practice becomes an open path rather than a trophy case. Faith here is knowing that truth reveals itself not through clinging, but through surrender. This teaching also prepares you for mortality. The ultimate attachment is to life itself, to the body, to the sense of I. Death becomes terrifying when viewed as the loss of possession. But non-attachment reframes death as part of the universal flow. Life was never yours to own. It was always a gift, a process, a moment in the great unfolding. Trust grows when you release ownership even of existence, allowing yourself to rest in the larger continuity that transcends the individual. The practice of non-attachment also strengthens compassion. When you release the need to control outcomes, you can be present with others more fully. You help not to fix or possess, but simply to serve. This makes compassion lighter and more sustainable, free from frustration when results are slow or invisible. Trust deepens when you see that your role is to offer, not to own the fruit of offering. Another gift of this teaching is resilience. When you are attached to outcomes, setbacks crush you. When you release attachment, setbacks become opportunities to adapt. You trust that even when one path closes, others can open. This flexibility allows you to move through life without being broken by loss. Non-attachment is not detachment from life, but deeper engagement with its fluidity, rooted in trust that change always carries new possibilities. Non-attachment also aligns with generosity. When you give without attachment, you release the need for recognition or repayment. Giving becomes pure, a direct expression of compassion. The act itself is the reward. This purity builds trust, because you see that generosity is never wasted, that it nourishes both giver and receiver regardless of visible outcomes. This teaching is not easy, because attachment feels natural. But through practice, you discover that clinging is not security, but suffering. The hand that grips tightly becomes cramped. The hand that opens rests peacefully. Non-attachment is the open hand of faith, trusting that what comes is enough, what leaves makes space, and what remains is always sufficient. So let this truth rest in your heart. The purest faith is not in clinging to outcomes, but in releasing them. To live without ownership of results is to live free. You act sincerely, love deeply, give fully, and then let go. You trust that the universe, in its vastness, will carry each seed where it belongs. And in that release, you discover the quiet strength of a heart unbound. When non-attachment takes root, the heart becomes lighter, freer, and less bound by the weight of outcomes. Yet a deeper question begins to stir. What about the endless cycles of gain and loss, joy and sorrow, birth and death that still continue? Letting go softens suffering, but it does not erase the reality that life moves in circles. This is where the teaching of Samsara enters, often misunderstood as a trap to be escaped. But in truth, Samsara itself can be the greatest teacher when approached with trust. Instead of running from its cycles, you can discover wisdom within them. Samsara refers to the continual round of existence, shaped by ignorance, craving, and clinging. It is the repetition of patterns that create dissatisfaction, chasing what cannot last, resisting what cannot be avoided, clinging to what inevitably changes. Yet Samsara is not an enemy imposed upon you. It is a mirror reflecting the habits of the mind. To see it as teacher means recognizing that every cycle of suffering carries within it the potential for awakening. The first lesson Samsara teaches is the futility of grasping. Each time you cling to pleasure, it fades. Each time you chase achievement, the satisfaction is temporary. Each time you try to freeze life, it slips away. The repetition itself reveals the truth. Clinging cannot bring lasting peace. This recognition is not despair, but liberation. Samsara teaches through repetition what the mind refuses to accept. Nothing permanent can be grasped. And freedom comes only by letting go. The cycles of loss also teach resilience. Each ending, though painful, shows that life continues. A door closes, but breath still flows, the sun still rises, and new conditions emerge. Over time, these repetitions cultivate trust that even in the darkest moments, life carries renewal within itself. Samsara's cycles of birth and death remind us that nothing ends without also giving rise to something else. This rhythm teaches faith in regeneration, not through abstract belief, but through lived experience. Samsara also teaches humility. The mind often believes it can outwit suffering, that if only the right strategy or possession is found, dissatisfaction will end. But cycles repeat, exposing the limits of control. This humbles the ego and invites surrender. Humility here is not defeat, but wisdom, the wisdom of seeing that control cannot stop the wheel, but awareness can transform your relationship to it. The cycles of samsara also reveal the interdependence of all beings. You suffer, but so does every other being. You experience loss, and so does everyone else. Samsara becomes a teacher of compassion when you realize suffering is not yours alone. It is a shared condition of existence. Trust deepens when you see that your struggles connect you to others, not isolate you. Compassion becomes the bridge across the shared cycles of birth and death, gain and loss. Another lesson of samsara is impermanence in motion. While impermanence is a principle, samsara shows it in action. Happiness fades, pain changes, conditions evolve. Instead of resisting, you can trust this motion, knowing that nothing you endure will last unchanged. This trust reduces fear. When pain arises, you know it will pass. When joy arises, you savor it without clinging. Samsara trains the mind to live fully in flux without being crushed by it. Samsara also teaches the consequences of actions. Each cycle reflects patterns. You repeat anger leading to conflict, greed leading to dissatisfaction, kindness leading to connection. Life shows you again and again how causes produce effects. This is not punishment but education. The wheel turns until the lesson is learned. Trust grows when you see samsara not as cruelty, but as a teacher offering the same truth until you understand it. This perspective transforms the meaning of suffering. Instead of seeing pain as meaningless, you recognize it as guidance. Pain points to where clinging persists, where illusions remain. Each discomfort becomes an invitation to release attachment, to deepen awareness, to cultivate compassion. Samsara teaches not by comfort but by friction, shaping wisdom in the fires of experience. To trust samsara is to see suffering not as failure but as the path itself. Samsara also reveals the importance of mindfulness. When you move through cycles unconsciously, patterns repeat endlessly. But when you bring awareness, repetition becomes revelation. You begin to notice, every time I cling, I suffer. Every time I release, I find peace. The cycle becomes transparent, and transparency brings choice. Mindfulness transforms samsara from blind wheel into illuminated path. Trust arises when you see that awareness itself can liberate, even within the cycle. This teaching also dissolves the illusion that freedom lies only in escape. Many interpret samsara as a prison to flee, but such thinking risks reinforcing aversion. Freedom is not found by rejecting life, but by awakening within it. The Buddha did not destroy samsara. he saw through it. By seeing its patterns clearly, he became free from their bondage. This shows that liberation is not elsewhere but here, within the very cycles that once bound you. Trust grows when you realize that awakening is possible even in the midst of samsara's turning. Samsara also teaches the preciousness of human life. The wheel includes many states: joyful, painful, blissful, tormented. Human existence, with its balance of suffering and possibility, offers the unique chance to awaken. If life were only bliss, you might never question clinging. If it were only pain, you might drown in despair. The mixture creates fertile ground for wisdom. To see this is to trust the gift of being alive now, with the opportunity to learn and transform. This perspective also reshapes your relationship to repetition itself. Many people feel trapped by recurring struggles, returning to the same mistakes, facing the same disappointments. But samsara shows that repetition is not meaningless. It is the classroom of the soul. Each cycle gives another chance to respond differently, to bring more awareness, to loosen clinging further. Instead of despairing at repetition, you can view it as practice. Trust deepens when you realize that each turn of the wheel is an opportunity to grow. Samsara also teaches the necessity of compassion for yourself. The cycles are not broken instantly. Habits run deep. Illusions take time to dissolve. If you condemn yourself for repeating patterns, you only reinforce suffering. But when you meet your own cycles with patience and compassion, you create the space to change. Trust in samsara as teacher means trusting that even setbacks are part of learning, that each stumble can be woven into wisdom. The cycles also reveal the truth of interconnected karma. Your actions ripple outward, affecting others, just as their actions affect you. Samsara teaches that suffering is rarely individual, it is collective. Trust deepens when you see that healing is not only personal but communal. Acts of kindness, forgiveness, and justice shift the wheel not just for yourself but for many. This transforms how you view responsibility, not as burden but as opportunity to influence the web. Samsara further reveals the futility of seeking permanent refuge in external conditions. Wealth, relationships, health, status, all are subject to the wheel. To cling to them as ultimate refuge ensures disappointment. Samsara teaches that true refuge must be internal awareness, compassion, wisdom. These are not destroyed by the wheel, they illuminate it. Trust arises when you stop seeking permanence outside and cultivate stability within. Another lesson is the acceptance of paradox. Samsara is suffering, yet it is also the path to liberation. Without cycles, there would be no chance to awaken. Without impermanence, there would be no possibility of transformation. Samsara embodies both bondage and freedom, depending on how it is met. To trust samsara is to hold this paradox without fear, to see the very thing that binds as also the teacher that frees. This teaching also transforms how you view mortality. Death is not the end, but part of the cycle. Birth and death are two movements of the same wheel. Fear of death arises from attachment, but samsara shows that death is woven into life's rhythm. Each ending makes space for new beginnings. Trust deepens when you see death not as enemy but as teacher, reminding you of impermanence and urging you to live fully now. Finally, samsara teaches the power of practice itself. Without awareness, the wheel grinds endlessly. With practice, the wheel becomes transparent. Each cycle becomes a lesson, each suffering a doorway, each repetition an opportunity. Trust in the universe grows because you see that even suffering serves a purpose when met with awareness. The wheel does not exist to torment you but to awaken you, so let this teaching rest in your heart. Samsara is not simply a trap to flee but a teacher to trust. Its cycles are mirrors, showing where clinging binds and where wisdom can arise. Each turn of the wheel carries lessons in impermanence, compassion, humility, and resilience. When you stop fearing samsara and begin listening to it, you discover that even in suffering, the universe is guiding you toward freedom. And in that trust, the wheel itself becomes the path. When samsara is understood not as punishment but as teacher, the cycles of joy and sorrow become guides rather than prisons. Yet even with this understanding, the mind often falls into extremes. It clings to rigid certainty in one moment and then collapses into paralyzing doubt in the next. Both tendencies keep you trapped. Certainty blinds, while doubt paralyzes. The Buddha's answer was the middle way, a path that avoids the extremes and reveals harmony with the universe. To walk this way is to trust not in fixed positions, but in balance itself, a trust that grows from openness rather than control. The middle way is not a compromise between opposites, but a deeper freedom that transcends them. Certainty insists on absolute answers, declaring reality fixed and unchanging. Doubt, on the other hand, undermines all confidence, leaving you stuck in hesitation. The middle way recognizes that both positions distort reality. Life is fluid, complex, and interdependent. To insist on rigid certainty is to deny change. To drown in doubt is to deny possibility. Trust arises when you let go of both and walk steadily in the center, responding to conditions as they unfold. This principle applies first to how you understand truth itself. Certainty often clings to dogma, to unshakable beliefs about how life must be. But the universe continually reveals new depths. What seemed certain yesterday may be overturned today. To cling to fixed certainty is to close the door to learning. Doubt, however, refuses to trust any path, endlessly questioning without ever committing. The middle way honors inquiry while also allowing practice. It balances openness to learning with the trust to act. This balance itself is an act of faith, a faith that wisdom deepens not by grasping at answers, but by walking steadily in presence. The middle way also shapes how you relate to pleasure and pain. Certainty clings to pleasure as the ultimate good, seeking endless indulgence, while doubt despairs at suffering, convinced it means failure. But both extremes distort reality. Pleasure and pain are natural aspects of life, neither permanent nor defining. To walk the middle way is to meet both without clinging or aversion, to trust that neither is final. This trust allows you to live fully without being enslaved by craving or fear. In daily life, extremes appear constantly. One moment the mind insists, "I know exactly how things should be," and the next it whispers, "Nothing matters, I can't trust anything." Both are traps. The middle way teaches you to pause, to breathe, to act without clinging to either extreme. This requires humility, the willingness to admit you do not know fully, and courage, the willingness to move forward anyway. Trust arises when you rest not in extremes, but in the openness of balance. This principle also applies to relationships. Certainty in relationships often appears as control, expecting others to act according to your script. Doubt appears as insecurity, never trusting the other's love or loyalty. Both extremes suffocate connection. The middle way allows space. You trust without demanding guarantees. You love without needing control. Balance here fosters intimacy rooted in freedom rather than fear. Trust deepens when both partners are allowed to be themselves, changing and growing, without being trapped in extremes of possession or suspicion. The middle way also transforms how you approach goals. Certainty demands perfection, insisting that everything must go as planned. Doubt undermines effort, whispering that nothing will succeed. Both extremes create suffering. The middle way recognizes that effort matters, but outcomes remain uncertain. You act with sincerity, You adjust as conditions change, and you release the demand for control. This balance allows persistence without rigidity, faith without naivety. Trust arises when you walk this steady path, honoring both effort and impermanence. In spiritual practice, the middle way is vital. Some practitioners cling to certainty, believing they have attained final truth, while others drown in doubt, questioning the value of practice itself. Both hinder awakening. The middle way encourages practice without attachment to results, trust in the process without clinging to conclusions. You sit in meditation not to reach an imagined end, but to meet this moment fully. Certainty would demand enlightenment now. Doubt would deny it is possible. The middle way rests in the unfolding, trusting that wisdom ripens naturally through steady presence. This path also dismantles the illusion of control over knowledge. Certainty believes, "I know," and clings to fixed views. Doubt believes, "I can never know," and collapses into inaction. The middle way says, "I will keep learning." This posture keeps the mind supple, ready to be surprised, willing to adapt. It is an act of trust in the unfolding of life itself, a trust that truth is not a possession but a living encounter. Another dimension of the middle way is its power to dissolve conflict. Extremes often fuel division, each side clinging to certainty, refusing to see nuance, or sinking into doubt that resolution is possible. The middle way does not erase differences, but holds them in balance, seeking wisdom beyond polarities. This balance does not mean passivity, but active listening, patience, and willingness to hold complexity. Trust grows when you see that harmony is possible not by defeating one side, but by walking between extremes. The middle way also offers guidance in the face of fear. Certainty insists on absolute safety, trying to eliminate risk entirely. Doubt insists danger is everywhere, making life paralyzing. Both distort reality. The middle way accepts risk as part of life, but refuses to be ruled by fear. You take wise precautions, but you also live fully. Trust here means confidence in your ability to meet conditions as they arise, without demanding impossible guarantees. This teaching also applies to how you relate to time. Certainty clings to fixed plans, demanding life unfold on schedule. Doubt despairs when plans falter, convinced nothing will work. The middle way allows planning while accepting change, trusting timing without forcing it. This balance cultivates patience, allowing you to act without anxiety, trusting that the path will unfold in its own rhythm. In the realm of knowledge, the middle way also dissolves arrogance and nihilism. Arrogance clings to absolute certainty. "I know the truth." Nihilism collapses into doubt. There is no truth. Both extremes distort reality. The middle way walks with humility. There is truth, but I see it only in part. This humility fosters openness, allowing continual learning. Trust arises when you rest in the unfolding journey of discovery rather than demanding final answers. The middle way also nurtures compassion. Certainty often breeds judgment, dividing the world into right and wrong, worthy and unworthy. Doubt breeds indifference, paralyzing action out of fear that nothing will matter. The middle way balances discernment with empathy, allowing you to see harm clearly without condemning the person entirely. This balance fosters compassion rooted in understanding, a compassion that trusts the potential for change in all beings. This principle also transforms how you respond to inner conflict. The mind often swings between self-assurance and self-doubt, one moment believing you are capable, the next believing you are worthless. Both extremes distort reality. The middle way allows you to see strengths and weaknesses honestly, without clinging to either identity. You trust not in perfection, but in the capacity to grow. This balance stabilizes the heart, freeing you from the violence of extremes. The middle way further reveals that trust itself is balance. Too much certainty and trust becomes blind faith, ignoring reality. Too much doubt and trust withers, collapsing into cynicism. True trust rests in the center. It does not deny uncertainty, nor does it demand guarantees. It acknowledges impermanence and interdependence, placing faith not in fixed outcomes, but in the living process of life itself. This balance also reshapes how you view freedom. Certainty clings to rigid order, while doubt sinks into chaos. The middle way reveals freedom as the ability to move with life's flow, without being trapped by either extreme. It is the freedom to adapt, to respond, to remain grounded in presence. Trust grows when you realize freedom is not found in rigid control or total surrender, but in balance between effort and letting go. On a deeper level, the middle way embodies harmony with the universe itself. Extremes arise from the ego's need to control, to define, to secure. Balance arises from trust that the universe already carries a rhythm. When you align with that rhythm, you discover peace. The middle way is not about forcing balance, but about uncovering the balance that is already present. To walk this way is to live in tune with reality, neither blinded by certainty nor crushed by doubt. So let this teaching rest within you. Trust in the middle way is trust in balance itself. It is the refusal to be trapped in extremes, the willingness to walk steadily between them, the humility to keep learning, and the courage to keep moving. By avoiding the poles of rigid certainty and endless doubt, you discover a harmony with the universe that neither extreme can offer. In that balance, trust becomes not an effort, but a natural way of being steady, open, and free. When balance in the middle way steadies the heart, you begin to sense a subtler truth. Harmony is not only found in how you move between extremes, but also in the spaces where nothing needs to be done. Beyond the struggle of certainty and doubt, beneath the noise of thought, there are gaps, small openings of silence that often go unnoticed. These pauses are not emptiness in the ordinary sense, but doorways into something vast, a direct encounter with universal intelligence. To trust the silence between thoughts is to allow the deepest wisdom to reveal itself, not through effort, but through stillness. In meditation, thoughts flow like waves, rising and falling without end. The mind often identifies with these waves, assuming that truth lies only in the content of thought. But if you pay close attention, you will notice that between one thought and the next, there is a gap. It may be brief, so subtle that it slips past unnoticed, but in that space there is clarity. There is no struggle, no identity, no story, just stillness. This stillness is not created by the mind, but revealed when the mind rests. Trusting this gap is trusting the presence of a wisdom deeper than thinking. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because they equate it with absence. They rush to fill gaps with words, distractions, or mental noise. But silence is not empty. It is full of potential. It is the ground from which thoughts arise and into which they dissolve. Without silence, there would be no space for sound. Without the gap, there would be no room for thought. To rest in silence is to return to the source, to recognize that wisdom does not belong only to the mind, but to the space that holds it. This silence teaches humility. The mind prides itself on knowledge, analysis, and argument. But in the gap, there is no analysis, no conclusion, no certainty. There is simply presence. To rest, there is to accept that the universe is larger than the intellect, that truth cannot be captured by words alone. This humility is not disempowering, it is liberating. It releases you from the prison of constant mental activity and opens you to a deeper intelligence already woven into existence. The silence between thoughts also nurtures trust because it is free from fear. Fear arises in stories the mind tells about what could happen, what might go wrong, what has been lost. In the gap, None of these stories exist. For even a fraction of a second, you are free. That freedom is not something you invent. It is already present, revealed when thought subsides. Trust deepens when you realize that peace is not something distant to be achieved, but something immediately accessible in the pauses. This silence also heals the obsession with identity. Thoughts constantly narrate who you are, your roles, your successes, your failures. But in the gap, those stories fall silent. For a moment, there is no self to defend, no identity to uphold. There is only awareness itself, open and boundless. To rest in this silence is to taste non-self directly, to see that identity is a construction of thought, not the essence of being. Trust grows when you experience yourself, not as a fixed entity, but as awareness itself. The gap also reveals the interconnected nature of existence. Thoughts divide reality into subjects and objects, self and other, here and there. In silence, these divisions dissolve. What remains is not separation, but unity. Awareness is not inside you or outside you. It is everywhere. Trust deepens when you realize that the universe is not something apart to be conquered, but something you are already part of, revealed most clearly in stillness. This silence is also a source of creativity. Many breakthroughs occur not when the mind is frantically working, but when it pauses during a walk, in a moment of rest, in the quiet before sleep. The gap allows the unconscious to surface, insights to arise unforced. To trust silence is to trust that wisdom comes not only from effort, but also from openness. By honoring the gap, you create space for inspiration to emerge naturally. The practice of trusting silence also transforms how you relate to emotions. Strong emotions often carry turbulent thoughts. Anger generates stories of blame. Fear creates stories of danger. Sadness spins stories of loss. But if you rest in silence, even briefly, you find that emotions too are waves passing through awareness. The gap reveals that you are not identical to anger, fear, or sadness. They arise, they fade, but awareness remains. Trust grows when you see that even intense emotions cannot overwhelm the stillness that holds them. Silence also trains patience. The mind seeks answers instantly, but silence teaches waiting. In the gap, there is no rush, no urgency, no demand for resolution. You rest, and in resting, clarity ripens naturally. Just as fruit matures in its time, wisdom blossoms in silence. Trusting this process frees you from impatience, allowing you to meet life without grasping for immediate answers. The gap between thoughts also mirrors impermanence. Every thought arises and passes, leaving silence in between. Observing this rhythm teaches that nothing is permanent, not even suffering. The silence reveals continuity beneath change, a steady presence that holds all fluctuations. Trust arises when you recognize that beneath the turbulence of life, awareness remains unshaken. This silence can also be practiced in daily life. Between one breath and the next, pause. Between one action and the next, rest briefly in stillness. Even amidst busyness, micro gaps appear waiting at a stoplight, sipping tea, listening to a friend. These moments are not wasted time, but invitations to return to the source. By honoring them, you train the mind to trust stillness rather than constant activity. The silence between thoughts also reveals the nature of freedom. Freedom is not the ability to control every condition, but the ability to rest in awareness regardless of conditions. In the gap, you experience freedom directly, not freedom to do anything, but freedom from needing to do anything. This freedom is the essence of trust, because it shows that peace is not dependent on external circumstances, but on your willingness to rest in silence. Many traditions describe silence as the language of the universe. Words divide, but silence unites. Silence is where prayer deepens, where meditation opens, where communion with the sacred occurs. The silence between thoughts is not absence but presence itself, the presence of the infinite within the finite. Trusting this silence is trusting that you are always held within something greater than the mind can conceive. This practice also dissolves fear of death. Much of the fear around death comes from the belief that awareness will end. But in meditation, every gap shows awareness without content. Thoughts end, yet awareness remains. This direct experience hints that awareness is not dependent on thoughts or identity. Trust grows when you see that what you are is not the stream of thoughts, but the silence that holds them. The silence between thoughts also teaches compassion. When you rest in stillness, the frantic judgments of the mind subside. You no longer define people by labels or stories, but see them with fresh eyes. Compassion arises naturally because silence reveals connection beyond judgment. Trust deepens when you experience love, not as sentiment alone, but as the natural expression of stillness. In the deepest sense, the gap is a glimpse of nirvana. Nirvana is not a distant realm, but the cessation of clinging, the release of illusion. Every gap reveals this directly. For that moment, there is no craving, no aversion, no illusion of self. There is simply freedom. To rest in these glimpses is to trust that liberation is not far away, but already present in the pauses you overlook. So let this truth settle. The silence between thoughts is not emptiness, but the essence of being. It is the space where fear dissolves, where identity loosens, where compassion arises, and where wisdom reveals itself without effort. To trust this silence is to trust the universe itself, not through words or concepts, but through direct experience. Each gap is an invitation, each pause a doorway. In learning to rest there, you discover that the deepest intelligence of life is always present, waiting in the quiet between thoughts. When you discover the silence between thoughts, you realize that wisdom is not always found in accumulation, but often in the space that remains untouched by noise. From this silence emerges a deeper way of seeing, one that is unburdened by the weight of assumptions, memories, and conclusions. This way of seeing is what Zen calls beginner's mind. It is not naivety, but a conscious openness, a trust that the unknown carries life more fully than stale certainty. To live with beginner's mind is to release the grip of past conditioning and meet each moment freshly, as if for the first time. Beginner's mind is often misunderstood as emptiness of knowledge, but it is not ignorance, it is openness. It means approaching every experience, no matter how familiar, without the arrogance of "I already know." When you cling to prior knowledge, you see only what fits your categories. When you approach with beginner's mind, you notice details you would otherwise miss. Life becomes vivid again, because you allow it to reveal itself without being forced into old patterns. Trust in the universe deepens when you let each moment surprise you, instead of reducing it to a repeat of the past. One of the deepest obstacles to trust is the conditioning of memory. Past hurts whisper, "It will happen again." Past disappointments murmur, "Do not try." Past successes even cling, convincing you that the future must replicate them. Beginner's mind breaks this chain. It honors memory, but refuses to let it imprison the present. By releasing conditioning, you allow life to show you what it is now, not what it was before. This is not forgetting the past, but freeing yourself from its dominance. This attitude also transforms relationships. Often, you interact with loved ones through the filter of past experiences, assumptions about how they will react, judgments from old conflicts, labels fixed long ago. Beginner's mind allows you to meet them anew, as if you had never seen them before. This openness can dissolve resentment and rekindle curiosity. Trust grows when you stop assuming and start listening, when you see the other not as a static character, but as a changing, living being. Beginner's mind also reshapes learning. Many people approach learning with the pressure of already needing to know, fearing mistakes, or clinging to what they think they understand. But true learning requires humility, the willingness to be empty, to not know. Beginner's mind removes the fear of failure because every step is discovery. You are not proving knowledge but uncovering truth. This approach makes even mistakes valuable because they reveal new pathways rather than final judgments. Trust in the learning process arises when you release the need to already be an expert. This teaching is especially important in spiritual practice. Long-term practitioners may become trapped by concepts of progress. I should be calmer by now, more advanced, more enlightened. Such expectations create frustration. Beginner's mind lets you sit in meditation as if for the first time, without demand for results. Each breath is new, each moment unique. This freshness opens the heart to trust, because you no longer measure practice by comparison, but by direct presence. Beginner's mind also nurtures creativity. When you cling to formulas or past successes, creativity stagnates. But when you approach a blank page, a canvas, or a challenge with beginner's mind, new possibilities emerge. You do not assume the path, you explore it. Many great artists and thinkers speak of returning to a childlike wonder, where curiosity is untainted by cynicism. Trust in creativity grows when you allow the unknown to guide you, rather than confining it within what you already know. This teaching also dissolves the rigidity of identity. The self often clings to fixed labels. I am this kind of person. I cannot change. I always fail at this. These labels are nothing but accumulated conditioning. Beginner's mind opens the door to transformation. It allows you to see yourself not as a finished product, but as an ever-unfolding process. Trust deepens when you stop clinging to stories about who you are and allow yourself to be new, to evolve, to surprise even yourself. In daily life, beginner's mind reveals beauty where you least expect it. A walk down the same street becomes alive with details you previously ignored: the texture of bark, the pattern of light, the sound of wind. Familiarity dulls perception, but beginner's mind restores it. This freshness is not fantasy, it is reality seen without the filter of habit. Trust grows when you realize that life is always offering richness, if only you allow yourself to see it. Another gift of beginner's mind is the softening of judgment. The conditioned mind quickly categorizes good or bad, success or failure, right or wrong. Beginner's mind suspends these judgments. It asks, "What is this?" rather than declaring, "I already know." This openness creates space for compassion, for understanding, for patience. Trust arises when you no longer imprison life in categories, but allow it to reveal its complexity. Beginner's mind also prepares you for uncertainty. The future is unknown, and the conditioned mind fears this. It clings to plans, to expectations, to the illusion of certainty. Beginner's mind welcomes the unknown because it has already released the need to predict. It says, "This is new, let's see." This openness transforms fear into curiosity. Trust deepens when you realize that the unknown is not a threat, but the very space where life unfolds. This way of being also dissolves arrogance. Knowledge can create pride, making you believe you see more clearly than others. Beginner's mind humbles you, reminding you that no matter how much you know, the universe remains vast. Each moment holds mysteries beyond comprehension. This humility is not weakness, but strength, because it keeps you open to learning. Trust grows when you stop clinging to the illusion of mastery and embrace the endlessness of discovery. Beginner's mind also transforms conflict. Arguments often arise from rigid positions, certainty that you already know the other's intentions or that your view is absolute. When you bring beginner's mind, You enter with openness. Perhaps I don't see everything. Perhaps there is more to learn. This attitude softens defensiveness and allows dialogue. Trust deepens when you meet conflict, not with stubbornness but with curiosity. In practice, cultivating beginner's mind requires awareness of habit. Notice when you dismiss an experience as ordinary, when you assume you already understand, when you repeat judgments automatically. In that moment, pause. Ask, what if I don't know? What if this is new? This simple shift opens perception. It does not erase knowledge but prevents it from closing doors. Each pause becomes an invitation to see freshly. This teaching also applies to aging. As people grow older, they often cling more tightly to identity, assuming that growth belongs only to the young. Beginner's mind dissolves this illusion. It shows that freshness is not tied to age, but to attitude. A child may approach life with openness, but so can an elder who refuses to let conditioning harden perception. Trust deepens when you realize that wonder is always available, no matter your years. Beginner's mind even reshapes how you relate to suffering. The conditioned mind says, I know this pain, it always destroys me. Beginner's mind says, this is new. Let me see what it is now. By meeting suffering freshly, you may notice details previously hidden: the impermanence of sensations, the space around them, the resilience within you. Trust grows when you stop recycling old narratives about pain and begin seeing each moment as unique. This attitude also transforms gratitude. Familiar blessings, food, shelter, friendship, often fade into background noise because of habit. Beginner's mind restores appreciation. You taste food as if for the first time, feel gratitude for shelter as if newly discovered, cherish companionship as if never experienced before. Trust deepens when you see that abundance is not scarce but overlooked, hidden behind the dullness of habit. In the deepest sense, beginner's mind is faith itself. To release conditioning is to leap into the unknown, to trust that the universe holds you even when you cannot predict. It is the willingness to meet each moment as new, not by clinging to old maps, but by walking with openness. This trust does not deny memory or knowledge, but prevents them from closing doors. It keeps you awake, curious, alive. So let this truth remain in you. Beginner's mind is the doorway to trusting the unknown. It is the courage to live freshly, the humility to admit not knowing, and the faith to meet each moment as if for the first time. By releasing past conditioning, you discover that the universe is not repeating itself, but creating itself anew in every breath. And in that freshness, trust becomes not effort, but the natural state of being awake. When beginner's mind opens the way, you begin to see that freshness is not only about meeting each moment without conditioning, but also about loosening the very sense of who it is that meets the moment. Beneath the curiosity and humility lies a deeper question. What exactly is this I that claims ownership of experience? To approach life with openness requires more than releasing assumptions. It requires releasing the boundaries of ego itself. This is the heart of the teaching of non-self, or anatta, and it is perhaps the greatest act of trust. To let go of the solid identity you cling to is to surrender into the flow of the universe, merging with something far greater than the self you thought you were. The idea of non-self often unsettles people because identity feels like the anchor of stability. Without me, what remains? Yet Buddhism teaches that what we call the self is not a fixed essence, but a collection of conditions: body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, consciousness arising and passing continuously. None of these are permanent, none are entirely under your control, and none can be pointed to as the true I. When you examine closely, the self dissolves into a process, a flow. To trust this truth is to release the illusion of solidity and discover freedom in fluidity. Clinging to self creates endless suffering. You defend your image, protect your pride, chase validation, fear rejection, and resist change, all because you believe a fixed I must be preserved. This belief makes you fragile because life constantly challenges the self you try to hold. A single insult threatens identity, a single failure feels like destruction, a single change destabilizes your ground. But when you see that the self is not fixed, threats lose their power. An insult touches passing conditions, not an eternal self. Failure becomes feedback, not annihilation. Change becomes natural, not terrifying. Trust arises when you release the weight of defending an illusion. Non-self also transforms how you experience relationships. Much suffering comes from seeing yourself as separate from others, a solitary entity competing for survival. But when you realize the boundaries of self are porous, the illusion of separation dissolves. The air you breathe flows through countless beings. The food you eat comes from earth, sun, and rain. Your thoughts are shaped by languages and cultures passed down over centuries. You are not isolated, you are interwoven. To trust this truth is to see that caring for others is not sacrifice but care for the whole to which you belong. Compassion deepens when the line between self and other fades. The teaching of non-self also liberates you from comparison. When you believe in a fixed self, you constantly measure it against others smarter, richer, stronger, more admired. These comparisons generate envy and insecurity. But when self is seen as fluid, comparison loses meaning. You are not a fixed object to measure. You are a process unfolding uniquely. Trust grows when you no longer need to prove your worth by surpassing others, but allow yourself to be part of the universal flow, each being a different expression of the same vast reality. In meditation, the insight of non-self can be glimpsed directly. As you observe thoughts, sensations, and feelings, you notice they arise on their own. You do not command the next thought or control the next sensation. They appear, stay briefly, and dissolve. If you watch closely, you cannot find a thinker apart from thoughts, or a feeler apart from feelings. There is only the stream of experience. This realization is not abstract philosophy but direct perception. The self you defend so fiercely is nowhere to be found. Trust arises when you let go of the need to locate a solid I and rest in awareness itself. Non-self also dissolves fear of death. Fear arises because the self believes it will be annihilated. But if there is no fixed self to begin with, what is there to end? Life is a flow of conditions. Birth and death are transitions within that flow. The body changes constantly, cells dying and renewing, identity shifting year by year. Death is part of this continuity, not the destruction of an eternal self. Trust grows when you see death not as personal loss, but as part of the great cycle, the universe transforming through you. This teaching also redefines freedom. Many believe freedom means expressing the self without restraint, asserting identity at all costs. But this form of freedom often becomes bondage, because the self must be constantly protected, defended, and advertised. Non-self reveals a deeper freedom, the freedom from self. When you stop clinging to identity, you are no longer imprisoned by its demands. You can act fluidly, compassionately, authentically, without needing to prove or defend. This freedom is not the assertion of self, but liberation from it. The practice of non-self also cultivates resilience. When setbacks occur, the ego feels crushed, interpreting events as personal failures. But when you release ego boundaries, setbacks are simply changing conditions. They are part of the flow, not attacks on identity. This perspective allows you to adapt with flexibility, to rise again without carrying the burden of wounded pride. Trust deepens when you realize that your worth is not tied to outcomes, because there is no fixed self to be diminished. Non-self also invites humility. When you believe in a separate self, it is easy to become arrogant, imagining that your achievements are solely yours. But when you see how interdependent life is, you recognize that every success is the fruit of countless causes, teachers, communities, nature, chance. This humility does not belittle you but grounds you in gratitude. Trust arises when you see that you are not carrying life alone, but participating in a vast web of support. Another gift of this teaching is the release of shame. Shame clings to a fixed self. I am bad, I am broken, I am unworthy. But when you see that self is not fixed, shame loses its hold. Mistakes are not proof of a flawed identity, but conditions that can change. Non-self reveals that you are not frozen in your worst moments. You are fluid, capable of renewal. Trust grows when you see that no mistake defines you permanently, because there is no permanent self to define. Non-self also reshapes how you view morality. When the ego clings to identity, morality can become self-centered. Good deeds for praise, restraint for reputation, generosity for recognition. But when self dissolves, morality becomes natural. Compassion flows not because you want to be seen as virtuous, but because the line between you and others has faded. Helping others is as natural as caring for your own hand. Trust deepens when you see that goodness is not imposed from outside, but arises from the recognition of non-separation. The teaching of non-self also strengthens mindfulness. When you cling to self, you interpret every thought and feeling as mine. Anger becomes my anger. Fear becomes my fear. But when you see that these are conditions arising and passing, you can observe them with less entanglement. Anger is simply anger. Fear is simply fear. They are not possessions. This detachment allows you to respond skillfully rather than react blindly. Trust arises when you see that you do not need to be defined by passing states. This perspective also deepens trust in the universe itself. The ego clings to self as if survival depends on it, but in truth, life has always carried you. Breath flows without command, the heart beats without effort, the earth spins without your control. To release self is to recognize that the universe sustains you even without your grasping. Trust becomes natural when you see that existence is not dependent on the illusion of self, but thrives in the absence of it. Non-self also transforms love. Ego-based love clings, possessing the other, fearing loss, demanding reassurance. But love rooted in non-self is spacious, free of ownership. It allows the other to grow, to change, to be free. This love is not diminished by impermanence because it is not based on possession. It is love as openness, as compassion, as participation in the same flow of life. Trust grows when you love without chains, when you allow love to be an expression of connection rather than ownership. On a deeper level, non-self reveals the ultimate trust, merging with the universe's flow. As long as you cling to self, you resist, trying to carve out a separate territory of control. But when you let go, you discover that the flow itself carries you. Life is not against you, but through you. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought is part of the universe moving. To trust this is to surrender the illusion of isolation and rest in belonging. So let this truth settle in your heart. Non-self is not loss but liberation. It is the release of ego boundaries, the softening of separation, the merging with the flow of existence. To practice non-self is to trust completely, to let go of the illusion of I, and discover the vastness that has always held you. In that release, fear dissolves, compassion expands, and trust becomes the natural state of being boundless, fearless, and free. When the boundaries of self dissolve, a new clarity arises. The world you experience is not separate from you. The struggles you meet, The patterns you resist, the lessons you encounter, these are not random events dropped upon you from outside. They are reflections, mirrors that reveal what lives within. This is not superstition, but a deeper understanding of interconnection. To trust the universe is to trust that every challenge and every joy shows you something about your own heart. By learning to see the world as mirror, you discover that life itself is a teacher, endlessly reflecting your inner states until you are ready to grow through them. The idea that the universe reflects your inner world can be unsettling at first. It suggests that what you resist externally may actually be rooted within, that the conflicts you face are not just about others, but also about the unexamined parts of yourself. Yet this is the very reason the teaching holds power. Instead of blaming, resenting, or resisting circumstances, you begin to ask, what does this reveal about me? What is this moment teaching? Trust grows when you shift from seeing life as an adversary to seeing it as a mirror of awakening. One way this reflection reveals itself is through relationships. The traits that irritate you most in others often highlight the parts of yourself you deny or reject. Anger at someone's arrogance may uncover hidden pride within yourself. Frustration at another's laziness may expose your own fear of rest or need for constant productivity. When you learn to read these reflections, relationships stop being endless sources of conflict and become opportunities for self-understanding. The universe uses others as mirrors to show you what remains unhealed within. Trust deepens when you realize these encounters are not punishments, but invitations to grow. Challenges in life also mirror inner states. When you feel trapped in cycles of failure, it may reflect hidden beliefs about unworthiness. When opportunities continually pass you by, it may mirror fear of stepping fully into your power. The world reflects back the assumptions you carry, not as cruelty but as lessons. By recognizing the reflection, you can shift within, changing the very conditions that shape your outer life. This is not blame but empowerment, the trust that your inner transformation ripples outward through the web of existence. The mirror also reveals itself through recurring patterns. When the same struggles return again and again, it is not because the universe is against you, but because the lesson has not yet been learned. The repetition is not punishment, but persistence. Life continues to present the reflection until awareness dawns. Trust deepens when you see that cycles exist to teach, not to torment. Each recurrence is an opportunity to meet the same mirror with greater wisdom, to shift your response, and to break the cycle. The concept of the universe as mirror also softens judgment. When you see another's suffering, instead of dismissing it, you recognize your own vulnerability reflected back. Their pain becomes a reminder of your shared humanity. When you see kindness in others, it reflects the same potential within yourself. This recognition cultivates compassion because you no longer view others as entirely separate. Trust grows when you realize that what you see in others always carries a thread of yourself. The mirror does not only reflect challenges but also strengths. When you feel inspired by another's courage, it reflects the courage within you, waiting to be expressed. When you admire someone's compassion, it mirrors your own capacity for love. Life continually shows you not only what you must heal, but also what you already hold. To trust the universe as mirror is to trust that every encounter carries meaning, sometimes a challenge, sometimes a confirmation, always an opportunity to see yourself more clearly. This teaching also shifts how you view adversity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this showing me about myself?" Illness, loss, setbacks, all can become mirrors. Illness may reflect neglected self-care. Loss may reveal attachment. Setbacks may uncover fear or lack of trust. These events are painful, but within them lies guidance. The mirror does not soften reality, but illuminates it, revealing where growth is needed. Trust grows when you see adversity not as senseless chaos but as a form of reflection guiding you toward wisdom. In meditation, this teaching becomes even clearer. The thoughts and emotions that arise are mirrors of your inner world. Anger, fear, desire, joy all surface from within, reflecting habits and patterns. By observing them without judgment, you begin to understand the inner forces shaping your life. Meditation shows you that the mirror is not only outside but inside, in every arising thought and feeling. Trust deepens when you stop fearing these reflections and begin learning from them. The mirror also reveals the illusions of ego. When you seek recognition, the universe may withhold it, showing your dependence on validation. When you cling to control, the universe may disrupt your plans, reflecting your resistance to letting go. These mirrors expose the ways the ego distorts perception. Instead of condemning them, you learn to thank them, because they reveal the exact places where freedom can arise. Trust grows when you see the universe not as cruel but as compassionate in its reflections. This teaching also transforms how you relate to success. When life flows smoothly, it reflects inner harmony. Instead of clinging to success or fearing its loss, you can see it as a mirror of alignment. The lesson is not to attach to it but to recognize the conditions that created it: balance, effort, openness, and to continue cultivating them. Trust deepens when you see success not as luck, but as reflection, reminding you of your inner capacity. The mirror principle also extends to collective life. The conflicts, injustices, and crises in society reflect shared human patterns: greed, fear, ignorance, but also resilience, compassion, and creativity. When you witness collective suffering, it mirrors the unresolved patterns of humanity. When you witness collective kindness, it mirrors the goodness that still exists. Trust grows when you see the world's challenges as opportunities for collective awakening, not signs of inevitable decline. This reflection also invites accountability. To see the universe as mirror is to accept responsibility for your inner state. If you constantly meet anger outside, ask where anger still lives within. If you constantly meet distrust, ask how you withhold trust from yourself or others. This is not blame, but empowerment. By transforming within, you shift what is reflected outside. Trust grows when you see that you are not powerless but active in shaping the reflections you encounter. The practice of this teaching requires honesty. It is easier to blame others than to admit what their behavior mirrors within you. It is easier to see external chaos than to examine internal conflict. But honesty reveals the mirror clearly. By facing it, you break through illusions and awaken. Trust arises when you stop avoiding your own reflection and meet it with courage. This teaching also cultivates gratitude. Even painful reflections become blessings when you see them as guides. The difficult person who triggers your anger is showing you where patience is lacking. The setback that frustrates you is showing where attachment still clings. Each reflection, however uncomfortable, becomes a teacher. Gratitude arises not only for joy but for the mirrors that challenge you. Trust deepens when you realize the universe reflects not to harm but to guide. Over time, seeing the universe as mirror transforms how you live. Life becomes less about resisting circumstances and more about listening to them. Every moment becomes a dialogue, a conversation with existence itself. Instead of asking for life to change, you ask what it is showing. This shift replaces frustration with curiosity, resistance with openness. Trust grows naturally when you live in dialogue with the reflections life offers. In the deepest sense, the universe as mirror shows that there is no separation between inner and outer. The world reflects you because you are the world. The boundaries of self dissolve, and what you encounter outside is simply another expression of the same reality. To trust this is to live in harmony with existence, knowing that every reflection, however difficult, carries meaning. So let this teaching take root. The universe is not against you but reflecting you. Every challenge, every relationship, every moment reveals something about your inner state. By learning to see these reflections clearly, you grow in wisdom, compassion, and trust. The mirror is always present, waiting for you to look not with fear but with openness. And in that reflection, you discover that the universe has been guiding you all along. When you learn to see the universe as a mirror, reflecting your inner world through every encounter, you also begin to recognize that the ultimate reflection is mortality itself. Nothing reminds us of impermanence more directly than death, yet most people treat death as an intruder, something to avoid, deny, or fear. Buddhism teaches something radically different, that contemplating death is not morbid, but liberating. To face the inevitability of dissolution with open eyes is to discover a deeper trust that death is not the end of life, but a transformation, a return into the boundless flow of existence. Death contemplation begins with honesty. From the moment of birth, death is the one certainty. Everything else, health, wealth, relationships, status, remains uncertain. To deny this truth is to live in illusion, constantly surprised when endings come. To contemplate death is to align with reality, to see clearly that everything you cherish will change, that your body will one day fail, that this chapter of life will close. Yet within this sobering truth lies profound freedom. When you stop pretending permanence exists, you can finally live fully. Trust in transformation emerges when you realize that death is part of the same rhythm as birth. The body is not destroyed, but returned to the elements: water, earth, fire, air, recycling into new forms. Breath leaves one body to become part of the larger atmosphere, feeding life elsewhere. The atoms that make you are ancient, forged in the hearts of stars, and they will continue their journey long after this body dissolves. To trust death is to trust this continuity, to see that nothing is truly lost, only transformed. This contemplation also reshapes your relationship with fear. Fear of death often hides beneath countless anxieties: fear of failure, of illness, of loss, of the unknown. At their root, they are all fears of impermanence. By turning directly toward death, you strip fear of its power. You realize that fear thrives in avoidance, but when you face death, you see it clearly. Inevitable, unstoppable, yet also natural. Trust arises when fear is replaced by acceptance, when you no longer resist the rhythm of life. Contemplating death also clarifies priorities. Much of human life is spent chasing possessions, status, or recognition, as if these will provide permanence. But when you remember that death is certain, these pursuits lose their grip. What becomes important is not accumulation but meaning, relationships, compassion, presence, wisdom. The awareness of death sharpens your vision, cutting through distractions. Trust deepens when you see that life's true value lies not in what you hold, but in how you live. This teaching also nurtures compassion. When you remember that everyone will die, arrogance fades. The person who angers you, the stranger you overlook, the loved one you cling to, all share the same destiny. Death equalizes, revealing shared vulnerability. This recognition softens judgment and deepens empathy. To contemplate death is to see yourself in every other being, to understand that all are walking the same path. Trust grows when you allow this awareness to expand into compassion for all life. Death contemplation also brings gratitude. Each breath, each moment, each connection becomes precious when you know it will not last. Instead of taking life for granted, you savor it. The morning light, the sound of laughter, the warmth of friendship all shine brighter against the backdrop of mortality. Gratitude transforms ordinary moments into treasures. Trust deepens when you stop demanding permanence and start honoring the fleeting beauty of each day. This practice also dissolves attachment. Clinging arises from the belief that we can hold things forever, but death shows this is impossible. Every possession, every role, every relationship must eventually be released. To contemplate death is to prepare the heart to let go, not with bitterness, but with grace. Trust emerges when you see that letting go is not destruction, but the opening of space for new transformation. In meditation, reflecting on death can bring profound calm. By visualizing your own mortality, not in fear but in acceptance, you cut through illusion. You see the body as fragile, temporary, a vessel that will one day return to the earth. This reflection does not create despair but freedom. It frees you from the endless struggle to secure the insecure. Trust deepens when you rest in the truth that life and death are not enemies, but partners in the same dance. This practice also reshapes your relationship with time. When you deny death, you waste time in distraction, assuming endless tomorrows. But when you remember death, time becomes precious. You stop postponing love, forgiveness, or joy. You speak the words that matter, take the steps you have avoided, live with urgency tempered by peace. Trust arises when you stop waiting for life to begin and embrace the present as your only guarantee. Contemplating death also dismantles the illusion of control. Much suffering arises from the belief that you can manage every outcome, protect yourself from loss, or avoid endings. But death is the ultimate reminder that control is limited. To trust death is to accept that life cannot be mastered, only lived. This acceptance brings peace because you release the burden of impossible control and rest in the flow of conditions. Death also teaches equanimity. Just as birth was not chosen, death will come regardless of preference. To contemplate death is to cultivate balance, to meet both joy and sorrow with openness, knowing both will pass. This balance prevents despair in suffering and greed in joy. Trust deepens when you live in the middle, not clinging to one side or resisting the other, because you know both are temporary. This practice also reveals the preciousness of human life. Out of countless forms of existence, you have been born into a body and mind capable of reflection, compassion, and awakening. Death contemplation reminds you not to waste this rare opportunity. It urges you to cultivate wisdom and kindness while you can. Trust grows when you honor life as sacred, precisely because it is finite. The inevitability of death also transforms your view of legacy. Instead of clinging to possessions or monuments, you begin to see legacy as the ripples of your actions. The kindness you shared, the wisdom you offered, the compassion you embodied. These continue beyond death, not as possessions but as influences in the web of existence. Trust arises when you see that your life matters not by what you own, but by the seeds you plant in others. This contemplation also heals the fear of the unknown. Death is often feared because it cannot be fully understood. But Buddhism teaches that not knowing is not failure, it is openness. Just as you entered life without certainty, you will leave it the same way. To trust death is to trust the unknown, to rest in mystery without demanding guarantees. This surrender is the ultimate faith, the willingness to step into dissolution with openness rather than fear. Facing death also transforms how you support others. When loved ones near the end of life, fear and denial often dominate. But when you have contemplated death yourself, you can meet them with calm presence, offering acceptance instead of avoidance. You become a source of strength, helping others trust in transformation. This service is one of the highest expressions of compassion, walking with another into the mystery without fear. Contemplation of death also illuminates rebirth, not only in the literal sense across lifetimes, but in the continual renewal of life itself. Every moment carries death and birth. Cells die and renew, breaths end and begin, thoughts dissolve and arise. By seeing death as part of continuous transformation, you realize that life is not static but flowing. Trust deepens when you see that death is woven into life as a doorway to renewal, not as annihilation. Ultimately, death contemplation is the practice of living awake. To remember death is to live fully, to release clinging, to cherish each moment, to act with compassion, to forgive, to love. Death is not separate from life, but its most profound teacher. By contemplating it, you transform fear into trust, denial into gratitude, resistance into peace. So let this teaching rest within you. Death is not the end, but the ultimate transformation. To trust in death is to trust in life's rhythm, the inevitability of dissolution, and the certainty of renewal. When you release fear and accept mortality, you discover freedom, courage, and deep peace. Death no longer looms as an enemy, but reveals itself as the universe's greatest lesson in trust, guiding you to live fully now and to step into the unknown with a fearless heart. When the contemplation of death teaches you that dissolution is not destruction but transformation, a further truth begins to shine through the cracks of fear. Even suffering itself is not meaningless. To face death with peace is already to see that pain does not simply exist to crush you, but to awaken you. This realization leads into the heart of one of Buddhism's most radical insights, that the universe itself is compassionate, not in the sentimental sense of sparing you from difficulty, but in the deeper sense of using every moment, even suffering, as a path toward awakening. To trust this is to believe that dukkha, the universal experience of dissatisfaction, is not punishment but guidance. Suffering, in its many forms, is unavoidable. Bodies grow ill, relationships strain, plans collapse, loved ones depart. No amount of wealth, power, or planning can shield you from these truths. To deny suffering is to live in perpetual shock whenever it arises. But to see suffering clearly is to recognize it as teacher. The Buddha's first noble truth was not an invitation to despair, but to honesty. Life contains dukkha. To trust the universe's compassion is to understand that this truth, though uncomfortable, is the doorway to liberation. The compassionate universe does not hide suffering from you, it reveals it so you may awaken. If everything were endlessly pleasant, there would be no reason to question, no motivation to look deeper. Comfort seduces the mind into complacency. Pain disrupts this illusion, forcing you to see impermanence and interdependence directly. When plans fail, you confront impermanence. When relationships strain, you confront attachment. When the body ages, you confront mortality. Each discomfort reveals a deeper law. Trust grows when you see suffering not as meaningless cruelty, but as the mirror pointing you back to truth. This reframing transforms the way you meet hardship. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this teaching me?" The illness that forces you to slow down may reveal how much you were exhausting yourself in pursuit of status. The heartbreak that shatters your expectations may reveal the depth of clinging you mistook for love. The failure that bruises your pride may reveal how much your self-worth rested on fragile outcomes. Each form of suffering carries within it the seed of wisdom. Trust arises when you no longer resist the lesson, but lean into it. Suffering also expands compassion. When you have known pain, you recognize it in others. This recognition softens judgment and fosters empathy. The universe uses your own wounds to connect you more deeply with humanity. A compassionate heart is rarely born from ease alone. It is shaped by loss, by struggle, by failure. To trust the universe's compassion is to see that even your pain has the potential to widen your heart, to open channels of kindness that would otherwise remain closed. The teaching also reveals the futility of avoidance. Much of human effort is spent trying to escape pain through distraction, addiction, denial, or control. Yet avoidance only multiplies suffering. The compassionate universe does not allow permanent escape, because escape keeps you asleep. By returning suffering again and again, life invites you to face it directly, to stop running, to learn. Trust grows when you see that suffering persists not to torment but to awaken, and that only by meeting it with awareness can liberation begin. Dukkha also illuminates impermanence. Pain arises because we cling to what changes: youth, health, possessions, relationships. Suffering highlights the truth that clinging cannot prevent loss. This recognition is painful, but it is also freeing. Once you see that nothing can be held, you stop exhausting yourself with futile grasping. Instead, you learn to meet life with open hands, cherishing without clinging, releasing without despair. The universe teaches this lesson gently at times and harshly at others, but always with the aim of revealing freedom. Trusting suffering as teacher also cultivates patience. Growth is rarely immediate. Painful circumstances often linger, tempting you to despair. Yet, even in long struggles, something shifts beneath the surface. Strength builds, perspective widens, resilience deepens. Looking back, you often see that the most challenging seasons were also the most transformative. The compassionate universe does not rush the lesson, but allows conditions to ripen until insight flowers. Trust arises when you stop demanding instant relief and start honoring the slow ripening of wisdom. This teaching also applies to collective suffering. Wars, inequality, environmental crises. These reflect shared patterns of ignorance, greed, and fear. While devastating, they also serve as mirrors, forcing humanity to confront its own shadows. The compassionate universe does not cause these crises, but it allows their arising to illuminate the cost of unawareness. Collective dukkha becomes the ground for collective awakening. Trust deepens when you see that even global suffering carries the possibility of transformation. Another gift of suffering is its power to dissolve arrogance. When life goes smoothly, pride easily arises, the belief that you are invincible, self-sufficient, untouchable. Suffering humbles, reminding you of fragility. This humility is not meant to diminish you, but to open you. When you stop clinging to the illusion of control, you become more receptive to help, more grateful for support, more compassionate toward others. The universe uses suffering to break the shell of ego so that love can flow more freely. Suffering also teaches surrender. The ego fights constantly to resist pain, to rewrite conditions, to demand reality, conform to desire. But suffering shows the futility of this struggle. In learning to accept what cannot be changed, you discover peace. Acceptance is not resignation but alignment. It is the wisdom of allowing life to be what it is, even when difficult. Trust grows when you realize that surrender does not weaken you, but strengthens your capacity to live fully. Contemplating suffering also reveals the value of presence. Much pain is amplified by the stories the mind adds, ruminating on the past, fearing the future. But when you return to this moment, the burden often lessens. A single breath, even in grief, can hold peace. A single step, even in loss, can be steady. The compassionate universe teaches presence by reminding you that life unfolds only here and now. Trust deepens when you experience that even in hardship, presence carries peace. This perspective also reframes failure. Instead of treating failure as evidence of inadequacy, you see it as guidance. Each failure redirects, revealing paths that do not serve and opening space for new ones. The universe uses failure to loosen attachment to rigid plans, to expand creativity, to build resilience. Trust arises when you see that failure is not an end, but a form of instruction, one that often carries more wisdom than success. Suffering also fosters gratitude for joy. Without contrast, joy might go unnoticed. The sweetness of relief after pain, the depth of laughter after sorrow, the brightness of friendship after loneliness, all are heightened by the contrast with suffering. The universe uses darkness to reveal light more clearly. Trust grows when you appreciate that even pain enhances your capacity to cherish happiness. This teaching also transforms how you support others in their suffering. Without trust in the meaning of pain, you may rush to fix or minimize it, offering hollow comfort. But when you see suffering as doorway, you can sit with others in their pain without fear, offering presence rather than false solutions. This companionship reflects the universe's compassion itself, meeting suffering not with avoidance but with love. In meditation, you can see suffering as energy moving through the body and mind. Instead of labeling it bad, you observe sensations, thoughts, and emotions arising and passing. This direct experience reveals suffering as impermanent and conditioned. It loses its power to define you. Trust deepens when you no longer identify with suffering, but see it as passing waves in the ocean of awareness. The compassionate universe also teaches that meaning is not always immediate. At times, suffering feels senseless, its lessons hidden. Trust requires faith that even unseen, the experience is shaping you. Often, clarity comes only in hindsight, when you recognize the strength, humility, or compassion born from struggle. The universe's compassion may not be obvious in the moment, but it is always at work. Ultimately, to trust suffering as meaningful is to align with the Buddha's own path. His awakening began not with denial of dukkha, but with full acknowledgement of it. By seeing suffering clearly, he discovered the way beyond it. In this way, dukkha becomes not an obstacle, but the very ground of liberation. Trust deepens when you see that your own suffering, however heavy, can be the doorway to awakening if met with awareness and compassion. So let this truth settle in you. The universe is not indifferent but compassionate, shaping you through suffering as much as through joy. Dukkha is not punishment but path, not cruelty but guidance. Every wound can open into wisdom. Every loss can expand compassion. Every struggle can deepen trust. To embrace suffering as meaningful is to trust the universe at its deepest level, to see that even pain carries the seed of awakening, and that nothing you endure is wasted in the great unfolding of life. When you begin to trust that even suffering holds meaning, a deeper symbol emerges from Buddhist wisdom, the lotus. It is no accident that this flower, celebrated for its beauty and purity, only grows in mud. The mud is thick, dark, and messy, yet from it rises the lotus, untouched in its brightness. This image is more than poetry. It is a profound reminder that wisdom itself is born from difficulty. To trust the lotus in mud is to trust that your darkest moments are not wasted, but are the very soil from which growth takes root. Mud represents the conditions most people would rather avoid: loss, confusion, despair, grief, failure, and fear. Yet these very conditions provide the nutrients for awakening. Without the mud, there is no lotus. Without struggle, there is no depth of understanding. The compassionate universe we spoke of earlier reveals its truth again here. Life does not waste pain but transforms it into the ground of wisdom. Trust in this process means you stop fearing darkness and begin seeing it as a place of hidden potential. Every human being carries mud. Some carry the mud of trauma, others the mud of regret, others the mud of longing or loneliness. It is tempting to hide it, to pretend it does not exist, or to believe it renders you unworthy. But the lotus teaches otherwise. Mud is not shameful, it is the raw material of growth. Trust deepens when you stop resisting your own darkness and allow it to nourish the possibility of transformation. This teaching shifts how you interpret hardship. Instead of asking, "Why must I suffer?" you begin to ask, "What can this suffering teach me?" the mud becomes less of a burden and more of a teacher. Grief teaches impermanence and compassion. Failure teaches humility and resilience. Fear teaches courage. Each form of mud, when faced honestly, contains the seeds of awakening. Trust grows when you realize that no matter how thick the mud, the lotus remains possible. The lotus also symbolizes purity, not because it avoids the mud, but because it grows from it without being stained. In the same way, wisdom does not mean avoiding suffering, but transforming your relationship to it. Pain may arise, but you do not need to be defined by it. Darkness may surround you, but it does not determine your essence. Trust arises when you see that your core remains untouched, like the lotus blooming above the mud. This symbol also speaks to resilience. The lotus does not bloom overnight. It pushes slowly through water, reaching toward light, sustained by the very mud that seems to trap it. Growth in human life is the same. Healing and transformation require time, patience, and persistence. Trust in the process means believing that even when progress feels invisible, growth is happening beneath the surface. What looks like stagnation may be roots deepening, preparing for bloom. The mud-to-lotus journey also dissolves despair. Many people believe their wounds disqualify them from wisdom or peace, but the lotus shows the opposite. It is precisely because of wounds that wisdom emerges. Compassion does not grow in untouched soil, it grows in the mud of loss and pain. Resilience does not grow in ease, it grows in hardship. The lotus whispers that your struggles do not ruin you, they shape you. Trust grows when you believe that even your darkest chapters can give rise to light. This teaching also reshapes how you view others. When you encounter someone trapped in their own mud, it is easy to judge or dismiss them. But the lotus reminds you that beneath their struggles lies the potential for beauty and wisdom. By seeing others not only for their mud but also for their hidden lotus, you practice compassion. Trust arises when you extend this vision to everyone, knowing that no one is beyond growth. The lotus also symbolizes patience with imperfection. The flower does not bloom instantly. The process of rising through mud and water is gradual. Likewise, human awakening is not sudden perfection, but gradual unfolding. Each step, each struggle, each small shift is part of the journey. Trust deepens when you stop demanding instant transformation and honor the slow emergence of the lotus within. In meditation, this teaching can be felt directly. When the mind is clouded with restlessness, anger, or sadness, you may feel stuck in mud. But by resting with awareness, you discover that stillness slowly purifies the mind. The mud becomes not a hindrance, but the very condition that teaches you patience, resilience, and compassion. Each session becomes an enactment of the lotus rising darkness, transforming into clarity. The lotus in mud also teaches the balance between acceptance and aspiration. You accept the presence of mud, knowing it is part of life, but you do not sink into it. You aspire to rise, to bloom, to embody wisdom and compassion. This balance itself is trust, accepting the present without despair while moving toward growth without impatience. This image also dissolves shame. Many carry guilt or regret like permanent stains, but the lotus shows that mud is not stain, it is soil. What you once thought of as flaws or failures can become the very ground of transformation. Shame begins to lose its grip when you see that nothing in your past disqualifies you from growth. Trust arises when you reinterpret your story as the slow blooming of a lotus through mud. Collectively, this symbol applies to societies as well. Communities mired in conflict, inequality, or oppression may feel trapped in mud. Yet history shows that great movements for justice and compassion often rise precisely from struggle. The mud of suffering becomes the seedbed for transformation. Trust deepens when you see that collective mud, however dark, can give rise to collective lotus. The lotus also teaches humility. No one blooms without mud. The most awakened beings did not escape suffering but transformed it. Even the Buddha's enlightenment grew from his deep encounter with dukkha. This truth humbles us all. Suffering is not a sign of failure, but the beginning of awakening. Trust arises when you stop resisting mud and begin honoring it as the ground from which wisdom grows. Finally, the lotus teaches hope. No matter how deep the mud, the possibility of bloom remains. Even when life feels overwhelming, when darkness seems permanent, the lotus reminds you that growth can emerge from the very place you least expect it. Trust grows when you believe that your struggles are not the end of your story, but the soil of transformation. So let this teaching rest in you. The mud is not your enemy, but your teacher. It is the ground from which compassion, resilience, humility, and wisdom rise. The lotus blooms not despite the mud, but because of it. To trust the lotus in mud is to trust that your darkest moments carry the seeds of awakening, that beauty and strength emerge from suffering, and that the universe never wastes your pain but transforms it into the soil of growth. You have now walked through the most powerful lessons Buddhism offers on trusting the universe, from letting go of control, to understanding karma as connection, to embracing impermanence, interdependence, compassion, patience, non-attachment, the wisdom of suffering, the beauty of growth in darkness, the support of community, the paradox of effort and surrender, the radical power of presence, and finally the liberation of dissolving the self into the flow of life itself. Each teaching has pointed to the same truth. The universe is not against you, it is guiding you. Trust does not mean blind faith, but open participation in a reality that is constantly shaping, transforming, and carrying you. When you release fear, soften attachment, and rest in awareness, you discover that you were never separate, you were always part of the great unfolding. If these teachings touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments which lesson resonated with you most and how you might begin to practice it in your own life. Your reflections not only deepen your own journey, but may also become the mirror someone else needs tonight. And if you want to continue walking this path with us, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next step in discovering more wisdom, peace, and strength within yourself and with the universe. Now, rest deeply, breathe softly, and let the universe hold you.